Hello, fellow philosophes, and welcome to Knowing You Know Nothing. This is episode number 39, and this is a very unique one that I felt strongly about for a while, and it's going to be the philosophy of woodworking. And I was a little worried going in that I would have a very difficult time finding philosophy from whether it's Western or Eastern philosophy that could tie into this particular topic, but it actually turned out to be really easy. And I look forward to digging through those tonight with my two guests. Before I introduce those two guests, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning again. As I mentioned throughout this month, my new logo for the podcast, I kind of kept the idea from the old one that I bought with the light bulb that was broken that symbolized enlightenment. So the new one has my ugly face on it with the broken light bulb that's in the background that's supposed to symbolize ignorance basically, and then the illumination of the light bulb is a metaphor for like the pursuit of enlightenment, somewhere along those lines. Now, the artist that did that drawing is a former student of mine and of another former teacher or two in this room. Her name is Kirsten Binkley, and she's also a fellow twin like me. She's a fantastic artist. You can find her on kirstenbinkley.art on Instagram, and she is great. Looking ahead a little bit, next week I'm going to have another former student of mine to discuss a completely different topic. She is my first former student to ever earn a PhD. She literally finished it about a month and a half ago, and her name is Olivia Batchelor. So I'm going to have her on the podcast, and then another student that is in the pursuit of her PhD. And it'd be cool to have them on to discuss what they went through to get through that process and what that was actually like, and just advice along the way, kind of like tonight's episode, kind of their own personal testimony about that. Two other last house cleaning topics. Here in a few weeks, I'm going to have Josh Perry on the podcast. His presence really interests me a lot because I strongly believe that you can start philosophy with very young children, even as young as like kindergarten or along those times. And he has a podcast called Little Philosophers, Lil Philosophers, and it's basically reading a children's book to an audience, a kid audience, and then he asks philosophical questions that go with them. He's also a father and has a full family, and I think he works in a hospital. He does such a fantastic job, and it would just be a great time to have him on the podcast and talking about how could we start children much younger on these philosophical concepts. And then the last one is next month. As one of my guests had told me before the show, I can't wait for this topic. I've had Eric Harris, an independent film critic, on the show at least a couple of times to do The Truman Show and to do Unforgiven. And we're going to be doing the movie No Country for Old Men, so it's going to be a much darker spin on the show. But what a great movie to talk about morality, especially in that modern sense. And with all the situation with the climate that's going on in our culture right now, I think we need to do better about having this open dialogue between each other about morals and ethics along the way. So that's actually the podcast looking ahead. Now, jumping to tonight's show, our first segment is really just focusing on getting to know our guest. My first guest is someone that had taught with me for years. We don't teach together anymore, but we're still pretty close. And I've looked up to him for a long time. He is like a human Swiss Army knife. And I'm sure he wouldn't give himself that much credit, but he does so many of these creative things. I've never known this guy or anyone to call this guy lazy before in my life, but I think it's his first podcast. So Sam Kessler, I appreciate you coming on the show. How does it feel to be on your first podcast? And would you like to tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Hey, it feels great. I'm really excited to be recording with you tonight and hope that the guests get a lot out of this. My name is Sam Kessler. I own and operate the Farmhouse Workshop, which is a one-man woodworking shop here in Russellville, Kentucky. I am a high school math teacher. I am married to my wife, Hillary. We have a beautiful daughter and a son on the way here in September. So, yeah, life stays busy, but I love what I do.
It sounds so much like the American dream.
It really is. It really is.
And again, keep in mind, I've known Sam, like I said, since he first got out of college and we started to teach together. And you know how you recall, and Zach and I had tied this conversation the other day about, your living conditions when you first got out of college compared to your living conditions now. And I think that all three of us have at least followed a positive trajectory in that process for comparing back then to now, even just 10 years ago. But Sam, thanks for that introduction to the guest. Just so you know, later on in the show, I'm going to show Sam's Farmhouse Workshop Instagram page, which has over 2,000 followers. It is fantastic. You can go on there to see images and video clips, and we'll show a couple of those. And maybe, Sam, you can maybe narrate a little bit about what you were doing in the video. And it'll be the first time on the show that I've used the share screen feature on Zoom, and I'm going to start doing this more often to showcase what my guests do and what they have to say and what they want to share. And I think it's another reason to tune into the YouTube version of the podcast to also be able to see that. So the last guest of the night, my other one, it's a much smaller show than what I was involved in last week. Him and I have also been friends since we were little kids, but we've also taught together, coached together for a long time. I wanted to bring him on the show because he's gone through quite the evolution the last year and a half when it comes to woodworking. Because I can tell you this, when me and this guy were kids, the last damn thing I thought he was going to do is woodworking. So it's cool to see all this stuff that he's done now, and I really look forward to his perspective. So our last guest is Zach Simpson, also an educator too. Zach, how does it feel to be on this podcast? And can you tell the guest a little bit about you?
I tell you, man, it was the last thing I thought I would do too, to be honest with you. But yeah, I'm happy to be here, Robbie. Happy to be talking with you. Very, very excited to be on the show with Sam. Can't wait to have a conversation with him, just to kind of learn from him and see all the things he's done. Does some great work. But again, my name is Zach Simpson. I'm a teacher and a coach, and my lovely wife and I have been married for 8 years. Our anniversary is coming up next week. And I currently live in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Coming to you live tonight from Indiana. Down here visiting my parents. But again, I haven't been woodworking very long. We'll get into that later. But I'm truly enjoying my journey so far, and I'm excited to share it with you all tonight.
Well, I appreciate that introduction, Zach. And Zach, if I recall correctly, I think that you and Sam have known each other. Like, I think that you guys have maybe been around each other. But I don't know if you guys have ever had a full conversation together before. But I know we've all taught in that same county for so long. So it's cool to get you both together and to have like these worlds collide and kind of get some ideas of what both of your experiences have been like throughout. And that means your successes and your frustrations, because as we all know, we are going to fail along the way. And I think it's humbling and it means a lot, especially for someone like me that I'm just going to be starting my experience into woodworking. And I'm trying not to cut my hands off and things like that. And I don't want to fail too much. But as Zach told me the other day, you're going to fail a lot. And that's something that you probably don't put on your Instagram page hardly at all, Sam, if ever. But I'm sure that from time to time there are mistakes that are made. So I look forward to getting that wisdom from you all. So as anybody that listens to the podcast before, I know this will only be the 4th episode, I think, that's on YouTube, but I've done 39. And the show usually starts off by kind of sandwiching philosophy at the beginning and at the end. And I try to bring up a little bit of philosophy throughout the show. I don't have a degree in philosophy, but I have a degree to teach history. And it's something that I feel very strongly about to help me as an individual and as an educator. So we're going to start off tonight by a quote from a famous author. And what I'm going to do is, I'll start with you first, Zach, on this, and then Sam, you can kind of bounce off whenever you're comfortable going. As I'm going to read this quote on the actual YouTube channel, you're going to see at the top of the page the quote and the author, which is Herman Lincoln Wayland. And this is from he was alive from 1830 to 1898. But whenever he brought this up, he doesn't say woodworking within the quote, but these are the type of quotes and passages that I like the most, are the ones that don't necessarily like say it. I don't know if you two have ever watched a movie before, but like when they say the title of the movie in the movie and you're like, oh my God, they said it. I think it could be more clever than that. So I like it when the philosophy is kind of buried deep within a passage of some sort. So I'll read it out to both of you. I think both of you have had a copy of the agenda too and saw the passage. So Zach, the question is, do you both agree or disagree with what Herman Wayland says, and why do you feel that way? So Herman says, show us a man who never makes a mistake, and we will show you a man who never makes anything. The capacity for occasional blunder is inseparable from the capacity to bring things to pass. So, Mr. Simpson, do you agree or disagree with this quote?
I agree with it in some sense. Obviously, the key word there is, mistake. And, I being an educator, I tell my kids, all the time that you're going to make mistakes. And it's something, when I go out to my garage and, that's where I'm working at right now. When I go out to my garage and, even if I'm working just, I have a finishing day where I'm just finishing the projects or I'm actually constructing and building the projects, I automatically tell myself that I'm going to mess up on 3 or 4 things. Like that's 100%. But at the end of the day, I know that that's okay. I think Sam could probably attest to this too. When you're building something, you're going to mess up multiple times. But I think woodworking kind of gives you a sense that if you mess up, a lot of the things are fixable. They're fixable, and you don't have that instant repercussion right there about making a mistake. so you can kind of feel more comfortable with making your mistake in that regards. But yeah, I mean, I think mistakes are part of life. I think you're going to make them multiple times. You know, a quote I always tell my kids is, you know, or I think a past fifth grade student told me this. They said, you make a mistake one time, it's a mistake. You make a mistake the second time, it's a choice. So I thought that's that's something that's always stuck with me. You know, if I go out there and make a mistake while I'm building something, I'd try my best not to make it again. Now that doesn't mean I'm not going to make it again, but I try my best not to. So that's what that quote kind of means to me.
When I hear that quote, it makes me kind of jumping off of what Zach said there. Mistakes happen. I mean, they just happen in the shop. They happen in life. But when he talks about the capacity for occasional blundering there is inseparable for the capacity to bring things to pass. You know, there is, you know, in a process, you know, I'm working on a dining table right now, and, you know, the build was going great until I put the finish on the table. And there was some glue in there that I didn't sand out fully, but I couldn't see it. So, you know, I sanded it again, and this thing's 8 feet long. And so, you know, I sanded it off again. I thought I had it. And, you know, I'm going through that process again of sanding it down just because I want it to be perfect. And so I think, you know, whenever you do make a mistake, like Zach said, you know, it's something to learn from. I do think that as you progress with your skills, whatever they are, you know, the mistakes become fewer and farther between. And you learn the importance of planning. You know, I think the old saying in woodworking, measure twice, cut once. Sometimes I'm measuring 3 or 4 times and checking stuff a whole lot before I ever actually make a cut, or before I actually you know, put a finish on something, or you know, anything like that. So when I think about that, it's like planning goes a long way in minimizing the mistakes there. And there are some things, you know, when you're talking about, you know, something like wood being a natural material, there are some woods that just don't want to work with you. And so, you know, right there, hey, I might be, you know, on the lathe turning something and just be getting tear out. But that might just be the wood, and it might not be my air, you know? So my air might just be, hey, I'm going to toss this and start fresh with a different species of wood, or whatever that may be. So I don't think it's always our fault when things go wrong. And so I think it's just learning, you know, what you're doing, how you're doing, what you're working with, and just learning more throughout that process.
You know, Sam, I was glad you said that. I was doing something the other day, man, and I had to measure that thing like 7 or 8 times. I'm like, is this something that it's just me because I'm just starting out? But somebody who's been doing it as long as you have, I'm like, yeah, that's right, man. You got to measure, because I mean, your measurements are going to be off if you don't consistently try to become a perfect example. So,
absolutely.
You know, one of the words that, and Sam brought this up in his answer, that he brought up in his quote, was that word about capacity. So I know that I'll often bring this up in class in terms of history scope, is that we all have the capacity for evil. And that's something you need to understand before we jump into these really dark things that happen throughout history. But in another way is that we all have the capacity to succeed and a capacity to make mistakes. So another question to toss up at both of you that still goes with this, and I'll start with Sam first this time, and that is, well, what is it really then that keeps people from doing this? Because he's ultimately saying that if you don't even open up your capacity to make mistakes, then you're never really going to create anything to begin with, and how are you actually going to grow? So Sam, what is it really that prevents people from doing these things?
From woodworking specifically, or just things in life in general?
I guess we can say, we can get to maybe the woodworking part later. I guess you can use it as that, or just in general.
Well, I think in general, knowledge goes a long way. You know, if I don't know how to cook something in the kitchen, let's say, you know, still along the lines of making something, I've got to do my research on how to cook it. I got to have the ingredients. You know, I have to have the time, the money to do it. I mean, there's all kinds of things that factor in your ability to actually do something and do something well. You know, and if you talk about the woodworking side of things, there are things that I can't make in my shop because I don't have the tools for it. And there are things that I can't make in my shop because I don't have the skill for it. That being said, it's you know, something that I might not be able to make now, but you know, over time I can learn skills to make different projects and whatnot. But I think it's just the overcoming that, right? Taking that step of faith, and that I'm going to try it, and I might not get ideal results the first time or the second time or the third time. But you know, if we keep at it, then it's going to be okay. Can I give you a funny little story from life? First Valentine's Day that my wife and I ever spent together, I thought, oh, I'm going to cook her dinner. It'll be nice, romantic. So I cooked chicken Parmesan. And in the directions, this thing said, don't cook the chicken till it's done in the, while you're frying it. It'll finish baking in the oven. Well, we cut into that chicken and it was still pink. I thought, man, I followed these directions perfectly. So, kind of ruined our Valentine's dinner right there. But, the pasta and everything else was still good. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those things. You might not get it right the first time, but that doesn't mean, hey, the second time I cooked chicken parm, like it was delicious, So, I think that just willingness to try something, just even if I don't get it right, I can learn from it. I can move on from it. I can do better the next time.
What about
Yeah.
you, Zach?
I think that, when you say that, I think two words come to mind, patience and failure. Now, that I don't think, and here again, this is in the short 2 or 3 months I've been doing this. I think woodworking has taught me more patience. Obviously, I teach younger kids, so that obviously teaches me a different kind of patience. But I'm talking about just the patience for doing something that you're really, I don't know how to say it. It's hard to explain, but like woodworking really teaches you how to be patient. It almost forces you to be patient in a certain way, but also you have to be not afraid to fail, and I think fear of failure is something that really kind of gets us to where it kind of gets us out of the mindset a little bit. But I think coming up through your life, I think failure can be a good thing. So if you get out there and you build something from a woodworking standpoint, if you get out there and you build something, I think we keep beating the bush with this, but if you get out there and you build something and it's not the way you want it, that's okay. It's all right. Throw it away, start something else, or, do something else with it. So, I mean, don't be afraid to fail, but also understand that the patience aspect of it is important as well.
Yeah. And not to sound cheesy. Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, I was going to say, there are some things that you just can't rush.
Mhm.
Like you talk about the patience side of things, Zach. Like when you're putting polyurethane on something, it takes hours to dry. Or if you're, putting oil-based paint on something, that stuff takes hours to dry. And that's something that you have to plan for, If you've got a piece of furniture sitting in your shop and you've got polyurethane on it, you're not going to be doing any other sanding in there or cutting or anything that's going to create, massive volumes of sawdust, because that's going to ruin it. And so just having that patience to, okay, I can put this finish on and then I can step away and do something else for a while. Like that's key to be able to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
Sam, and you said that. I'm sorry, Robbie, hang on a second. I learned that the hard way. First project I ever did, man. I had 2 coats of poly on there. I mean, the project was far away. Like it was far in the garage away. Obviously not. I'm over here on the miter saw doing something else, man. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And once that sawdust gets in that poly, man, it's done. So Start over. Yep.
Yeah. Well, hey, I thought you guys did a great job of answering that. I keep wanting to show Zach's Facebook page pictures, but then Facebook people keep messaging me and it keeps beeping during the show. So I might have to close those out a little bit and bring them back later. Now, both of your answers were, gosh, even better than I expected it to be. And I guess the last thing I know I'm trying to milk this cow dry, but I guess what I'm wondering here is that a long time ago, we might say, well, it was accessibility is what prevented people from doing this. So one of the things I was curious about is that, I teach European history on an AP level. So if I go back to the Middle Ages to little villages or guilds, you two would be extremely valuable people in that community. Like, and today I know that social media will imply, well, a lot of people can kind of do these things and some of it intimidates certain people, but I still see it being very, very valuable. So I guess one of the last things I'll ask is, you can't argue that it's not accessible anymore because of the access to internet. And I think all 3 of us have a mutual friend that I won't mention his name on here for privacy reasons, but one of the best advice that he gave me before is if you don't know how to do it, and Zach, you said this to me the other day, there's not just directions and pamphlets online, but there's also YouTube videos. So if you have access to a YouTube video to watch people step-by-step make things, and you can just access almost anything you want to be a writer, to be in carpentry or these other things. So then I guess you can't use the excuse necessarily of accessibility other than, and if you're saying it from Sam's way, well, I don't have the tools. So let's just say hypothetically, an individual has the tools, they have the accessibility. So then I ask, well, what else is holding them back? So does it become just a hubris problem? Is it more of a pride that they're kind of scared of messing up? I always go back to that famous episode of The Office. I don't know if you guys remember the one where Pam puts her painting on the art exhibit, and everybody, Oscar and everybody, tears it to shreds the whole time. So obviously both of you will make mistakes when you make stuff. And I guess whenever you think something is finished, that's when you're going to start showing people that you don't want to show those mistakes. So is it because for me starting out doing this, I get frustrated a lot with myself. Like I worry about what everybody else will think secondary, but I get really easily frustrated with myself messing up. So that's where you both are saying to patients. So my question to both of you, and Zach, this will be you first, is does pride play a role in it? Does hubris play a role in preventing people from attempting this?
You know, hold on real quick, back to the accessibility, you know, the accessibility in today's culture, obviously not even remotely close. It is frustrating, but the biggest thing too is the financial aspect of it, you know, because I'm telling you, there's a lot of materials, and Sam made a good point, you know, he's been doing it a long time. There's still a lot of things he can't do because he doesn't have the machines or something like that. This stuff costs a lot of money. You know, I'll be honest with you. It costs, the machines cost money. The wood's not cheap. But at the same time, you know, you have to really kind of take into account what you're doing and, you know, saying, okay, you got to kind of take the risk a little bit. Even if you're not selling it, you're just trying to make it. You know, when I first started making stuff for my wife, you know, she was, you know, I was really wanting to show her that I could do it too, you know. And what was your second question again? Sorry.
No, the question, you know, you're right on accessibility. So if we pick someone that has refused to make the decision to start learning how to do this on their own, do you think sometimes the issue is actually a pride issue? Or are they worried about, you know, making mistakes so much that they hurt their pride, their hubris?
I hope not. I hope someone's not too prideful to try something new. But again, that's just my opinion. There is I think pride could hold you back, but I also think that, you know, if you understand kind of what Sam and I were already talking about, to me, there's no better reward than creating something new and building something with your hands and saying you did it. You know, I did that. I guess it's a personal preference. Like I'm not too prideful but I'm also, you know, we're also all three educators, and we teach kids on a daily basis what it takes, the steps that it takes in order to do something. And the pride issue never got in my way. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure about Sam, but it's never gotten my way.
The pride doesn't really get in my way. The thing that I would say about it, the accessibility is not just having the money for tools and materials. It's also time. You know, it takes a while to whatever you're making is going to take time. It's going to take space, and space is something that I know is really limited. And then I think there's the desire too. I think, you know, when you get into, you know, custom furniture and, you know, handmade gifts and that kind of stuff, man, it's a heck of a lot easier to just go to the store and buy it or order it on, you know, Amazon or whatever. And so I think, you know, when my wife asks me, can you build this? The answer is, yeah, I can build that for you, but here's what it's going to take. And then we sit down and talk. Is it worth my time and our resources? Or do we want it quicker? Do we want that instant gratification? And I'll be honest, there's times when it's like, I don't have the time in my shop to make this, so I'm not even going to attempt it, even though I know I probably could. Or there's, you know, times when it's like, yeah, I have time right now that I can set aside and build whatever, you know, it is that you're wanting there. So, I mean, the time aspect of it for me is the time and the space is probably more than anything. You know, when I first graduated from college, I knew I wanted a workshop, but I didn't own a home where that was going to be possible. You know, I was renting and, you know, so I had a palm sander and that was like it, you know? And so I refinished a couple furniture pieces here and there. And one of them we actually still have, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, it's the time, it's the money, but a lot of it is the space. You know, do you have a space where you can, you know, carve out, you know, something in regards, keeping it on topic here of woodworking. And I know people who, you know, live in New York City in a tiny apartment, and they just have a corner of their living room or a corner of their dining room or kitchen for just a tiny workbench and a few hand tools, and they make beautiful stuff. So, you know, I think when we think, hey, I have to have a dedicated space for woodworking, you really don't. You can do it in a real small space, but you're not going to be building, you know, 12-foot conference tables, you know? So do you have the means to make what you're wanting to make, And so I think when it comes down to it, for me, it was never the pride. And you say, I might not show the mistakes on social media, but I do like to show the process. And, I get people saying, hey, have you thought about doing it this way, or it'd be better this way? And that's one of the things I really enjoy about my social media and my followers is that we're always sharing ideas, whether it's finished product or, hey, I'm just getting started on this project, there's always input going back and forth. And most of it's positive. I think people understand this kind of movement of people wanting to like get out and make stuff with their hands. And, in this process, people are uplifting about it. It's one of the most positive communities that I've ever been a part of, I think. So yeah.
That's great. I mean, both of you made me think of some things that I completely overlooked about. It's not just accessibility of knowledge, but it's accessibility of these tools, the space, the time. All those are really smart to consider. And Sam, something that's always, for some reason, reminded me of you and your background experience. And I mean the way you are on social media. I love the time-lapse stuff. I love that you actually show the process. I remember growing up as a child, and I don't know if I'm probably going to sound really old when I say this, but I remember watching Bob Vila when I was a kid and watching those This Old Home thing. And it wasn't like the finished product that I always loved watching as a kid. I loved watching people build stuff. I just thought it was some of the most fascinating things ever. And your social media and your workshop, Sam, kind of reminds me of a smaller version of like Nick Offerman's shop. So I follow Nick Offerman a lot and his social media about his workshop. He also brought up wrote a book that Sam and I talked about, which was Paddle Your Own Canoe, which was a really interesting book about that. And on that show, Parks and Recreation, a lot of people don't know that the workshop that he has as Ron Swanson is actually his workshop. And the canoes and all that stuff, he really built that stuff on the show. And he has a shop that he has a crew with him now and all those things. But Sam, I love how you said, because I was just about to ask you as a follow-up, but then you said it, which was great, is what about those people that are in those small apartments in like a New York or even just here in Logan County, is they want to make those things, but it's like you got to find your own niche. Like you got to find your own little corner of the world and do something that means a lot to you. And Zach, you had mentioned something that I know is going to come up in a little bit, so I'll wait till the next segment to ask it, which is I can't wait to get to the point of how both of you feel when you finish something. Like when something is completely done, I can't imagine how that must feel. And I guess what Toss said, you, Zach, and I'll just go ahead and ask it now. So Zach, your first big project, how did it feel for you when you finished it? And then Sam, I have a different way of asking you the same question. If you can remember your first one, by all means, mention it. But for you now, it's more of an interesting one. It's kind of like, has the wow factor wore off some? Or at what point, how do you avoid it feeling like work? And do you still truly enjoy a finished product the way you did when you first started when you were younger? So Zach, starting with you first, how did it feel when you finished that first project?
And this kind of goes into how I got started too. This kind of happened, I guess it was last year. And then, like I said, I teach and I coach. So during basketball season, I don't have a lot of time. And I'm glad Sam mentioned that about the time. Time is, yes, 100% a big part of it. But it actually started when we were, my wife and I were talking about getting a coffee table in the center of our living room. And, we were going around to different places looking for coffee tables. And I was like, man, these things are expensive. Like the ones that we wanted. We were sitting in a furniture store and I kind of looked at her and I just said, what if I built one? And she kind of just looked at me and was like, what? She was like, oh, you can tell the look in her face was like, there's not a chance in the world you could do
know
this.
Your wife. I can't imagine
that's
her
awesome.
When you said that.
She's like, there's not a chance in the world that you're going to build a coffee table for us to put in the center. And Sam, if you're like me, or any of the listeners are like me, when you tell me I can't do something, that's all I need. I'm like Michael Jordan, The Last Dance. Everybody's saying you can't do this. That's all you have to do is tell them you can't do something. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna do this. And I went to researching, and to this day, and again, this was about a year or two ago, that coffee table is still sitting in our living room. And I'm gonna tell you right now, it is ridden with mistakes. But at the same time, and I want to go back and fix them. As a matter of fact, I told Alyssa, I said, will you let me make another coffee table? Because I'm much better at it now than I was then. She said, no, I don't want you to make another coffee table because that signifies where you started. And I said, that meant a lot to me. It really did. Well, when I first looked at that coffee table, I built it and it was way too big. It was huge. And it was too big probably for the living room. So I took a couple pieces off of it and I looked at it and I said, so the feeling, to answer your original question, the feeling was I felt accomplished. You know, I was talking to a buddy of mine on social media, and he made a good comment. He said that there's something just or gratifying and rewarding when you complete something with your hands. And that's kind of what it felt like. It was just kind of a feel of it never felt like, well, I just showed her, you know, I just did that, you know, and she thought that, but at the same time, I was proud of what I did. And so that's kind of what, I guess just being proud of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about you, Sam?
So your question, if I recall correctly, was about has the wow factor worn off when I finish a piece?
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this, Robbie. The first pieces that I actually made to sell were not big pieces. You know, when I started, most of the stuff that I was actually making to sell back in 2014 was off of a you know, small benchtop lathe and, you know, pins and turn goods. I did some cutting boards and that kind of stuff. So I never really got the big wow that you would get with, you know, a really nice piece of furniture. But, you know, I'm still making furniture and delivering furniture. And whenever I deliver a piece and I put it in my client's home, you know, and I generally put a coat of paste wax on it just to, you know, give it a little more water protection there. I always still get that, like, man, this looks good in this space. Like they're super pleased with it. Like, and that's why I keep doing it, you know? Like Zach was saying, there is that satisfaction that you get. And whether, you know, you're building something for your own home or for your wife or for a client who's paying you, you know, good money for it, there's always a sense of satisfaction, I think, from yourself that, yes, I did this, but also I did this for somebody else and they're very pleased with it. And I hope I never lose that. You know, I hope I always get that sense of satisfaction of seeing somebody's face when it's delivered and, man, this fits perfect and you nailed the finish and, you know, all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, Sam, I think that's a great segue into one of the questions we're going to ask later, but I'll go ahead and bring it up now, is what's the best advice that you two could both offer our listeners from a beginner's outlook, but also from someone who's more experienced too, is how do you go by preventing it from feeling like you're losing the utility for doing it? It's becoming to the point where, like, well, for you, Zach, I know you're just starting, but Sam, you do this thing for money for people too that want objects made. How do you prevent it from losing that enjoyment? What's your best advice to our listeners for that?
Zach, you go ahead and take the lead on this one. I got to think for a minute.
Okay. I think, you know, to me, it's constantly be a student of what you're working on. You know, constantly, like, here's the deal. I won't overwhelm myself. If someone is just beginning, I think being overwhelmed with what you're trying to do could kind of really just get to where you don't feel as interested in it as much. So I'll tell myself, I'm going to learn one thing new today, or I'm going to learn one thing new. Today I'm just going to learn about finishing. You know, today I'm going to teach myself about angle cuts on a miter saw, and just really not trying to feel overwhelmed. Because, you know, that's something we never want to feel as people. We never want to feel any type of overwhelming, and just realize that you're doing it, you know, whether you're doing it for people or you're doing it for yourself, just understanding your purpose, like and asking yourself, well, what am I trying to accomplish here? And if you set yourself that, and again, the overwhelming factor, just stay positive, you know, never have a negative attitude with what you're doing. And that's not just with woodworking, that's with anything, but always have the positive attitude.
Now, Sam,
go ahead.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I do want to bring up a word that did come out of your mouth at the beginning, and that was the word growth. So whenever I heard Zach's answer, and in the route that I guess I thought you were going to go, and maybe you still are, is the fact that, to me, no matter what project you're doing, if you go into it expecting to grow in some way from doing that project to learn something new, I don't know how you can ever look at that in a negative way, because you're gaining something from that. But I guess what I'm getting to, and maybe this is another good example of it, and I'm not disregarding the quality of these, Sam, because you do a fantastic job. So whenever we used to teach together, I bought one of those wood style pins from you. You made one of those for me, but I remember you making a lot of those. And and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you make like cutting boards, right?
Correct.
Oh yeah. Now you make a lot of those, at least on the social media. It looks like now with, and I don't mean like Zach's right. I agree with Zach from a philosopher standpoint on, I love that background when it comes to making new things all the time. So if we're in your situation, Sam, though, and you are making, let's say 10 or 15 or 20 cutting boards or pens, how do you prevent yourself then from losing, I guess, the utility of what you're doing when you're doing something that's rather repetitive?
So that's a great question. And, I don't want to ever become disinterested in my business. The one thing that I think kind of keeps me going is if I got to order for, 10 or 12 cutting boards, how can I make this process more efficient, right? Making a cutting board for me is a no-brainer. Like, it takes zero thought, and it is at this point just, hey, I need to make a cutting board, boom, go in and do it, and let the glue dry, and then go in and finish it. It's that simple for me. But when when a realtor asks me, hey, can you make a batch of cutting boards for me for closing gifts? Sure. Like, give me a week. I got to get the wood ordered. If I don't have any in stock, I'll get the wood ordered, and then let me crank this out as quick as I can. And I never want to sacrifice quality. Like, that is the one thing that I'm not going to do and cut corners in the process. But what can I do as I'm out here working to make my time is as efficient as possible, so that the stuff that I don't like doing becomes easier. There is this idea behind, I've been reading some business books and whatnot, mastering the monotonous tasks. And one of those things in woodworking is sanding. Like, sanding is nobody's favorite thing to do. And so when it comes time to put sand paper to those cutting boards, okay, how can I do this in the most efficient way possible? Or when I'm, doing glue ups, how can I do glue ups? Maybe it's with fewer clamps today, maybe I'm going to go try and do that. Or maybe I'm going to do it with as little glue squeeze out as possible, but still have strong joints. Like, there's always a challenge that I think you can continually push yourself at, even if it's something that you've done a couple hundred times. Or how can I take these pins, and how can I, instead of just doing 2, how can I, make my life a little more efficient and go ahead and prep 20? And then when I get an order for a couple, makes it quicker.
Yeah. Now, Sam, I know I've created kind of a compound question situation for you, because you just answered my question there greatly, but I'm sure you also had an answer for the other one. Does that address your first one too, as far as how do you prevent what you do from becoming, I guess, feeling too much like work, like you're dreading doing it?
I'll be honest. So it is work. Um, so whenever you've got work for a client, it is work, and there's no getting around that. I think for me, still finding the enjoyment in it is I think more important than it feeling like work, because I can't get past that. For the last few months, I've been backed up with projects, and so as soon as I finish one, it's on to the next one, and I don't really, I might take a day or two to reorganize the shop or clean things. Get stuff back in place, or I might take a day or two to do some small projects that I need to get out of the shop. But for me, I hardly ever go out in the shop until my daughter's in bed. And so at that point, I'll turn on the radio, I'll listen to some interesting stuff on the radio, or a podcast, or some music, and just get that alone time, and that's where I get to, process the day, process my thoughts. So even though it is a work environment, it's not a high stress work environment. I've become comfortable in my shop. I've become comfortable with my tools, with the plans that I draw up. So yes, it is always, I think, going to feel like work. But I think people were made to work, and work is not something that I think we should shy away from. So.
Yep. Me too. I agree. Man, Sam, you said something that I found so humorous, so I didn't mean to laugh at it in a disrespectful way, but I was laughing.
Thanks a lot.
With Zach and I talked about the other day, because I love when you were just straight up, you're like, I'm not going to lie, it's work. But Zach said the funniest stuff to me about last week. He goes in his garage, he's like, I find it relaxing. I find it therapeutic. And I was like, what? I was like, I was being just super nervous and stressed out the whole time. But at the end of your answer, Sam, like whenever your daughter does go to bed and you go out and work late, you are your own boss in a way. And I can see it being therapeutic. It's work, but it still feels good. It's a lower stress situation. Zach, I got to know from from your standpoint, because for you it's been like a relaxing process. So what do you think about Sam's answer as far as he's still not going to lie though, it is still work. Do you agree with him on that?
No, I'm 100% in agreement. I mean, I didn't, when I say it's therapeutic, I don't mean that it takes the work factor away. No, absolutely not. Matter of fact, I love to work. You know, my father taught me that at a young age. My mother taught me that at a young age, that, you know, you have to work. And so every day I approach that even when I open my door to go into my garage, like I'm about to go to work. I don't think of it as, you know, but when I'm like Sam, when I get out there, I immediately turn on the music, turn on the podcast, and like I'll sit out there and I'll sing while I'm doing it. I'll maybe do some dance. I mean, it's stress reliever. The smell of the wood, the using the tools. But no, Sam's 100% right. It's hard work. It really is. It takes a lot of patience, but like I said, there's nothing. You know, it's a different type of patience, though. So, yeah, I'm 100% agreeing with what Sam said.
And that being said, you know, when you're a one-man woodworking shop, there are things that's just hard. It's hard to wrangle a piece of furniture on your own.
Oh, yeah.
It takes up a good amount of space in my shop when I'm you know, working on an 8-foot table or something like that. And so, you know, it's laborious. You know, it's a strain on the muscles. It's a strain on, you know, lots of different things. But, you know, it like you said, you know, getting to be your own boss and getting to call the shots on stuff, even if you're working for a client and they say, hey, I need it to be done this way. You still get to decide how to make that happen.
Gotcha. Well, I know I've deviated quite a bit from the agenda, but we're still getting. I mean, these are even better than what I had planned for the show. So let's kind of get in, I guess, into an origin story. I know, Zach, that you had mentioned a little bit about kind of how it started for you and your wife went shopping, but you can feel free to add more to it here. So I'll start with Sam first this time, and I would say, what originally inspired you to even start doing this to begin with?
So I grew up kind of around tools with my grandfather. When I was little, you know, he would let me come over and he'd have me design stuff up and we'd cut stuff out on the scroll saw. And, you know, I was always interested in making things. When I was a senior in college, though, I had to add 3 hours to my schedule to stay full time because I had done preloaded a lot of my classes my freshman and sophomore years. And so I sat there and I debated between a cooking class and a furniture making class. And if I had done the cooking class, who knows where I'd be right now, but I chose to do the fine furniture making class. And I absolutely loved every minute that I had in that shop at Western. Like, there's still days that I wish I could just go back into that shop at WKU and work with, you know, the massive industrial pre-World War II band saws and, you know, work with some of those really, really nice machines. But I learned so many valuable techniques in that class that I still use today. And after I finished that class, I thought, man, like, I've got to have a woodworking shop one day. And so that was always kind of like a dream of mine. And when I graduated with my master's, no joke, my one of my uncles who has his he's got his PhD in engineering. He sent me a check. He said, hey, congrats on finishing your master's in math. Like, that's a big deal. And so I told my wife, I said, hey, I'd really like to take this money here and buy a lathe. I said, I've always wanted a lathe, want to, you know, get better at turning and whatnot. She said, go for it. And so I had a really small shop at my last house. And, you know, I had a lathe in there. I actually had quite a few tools in there. But that's kind of what started off for me. Is just a cheap lathe. It was a Harbor Freight lathe. Spent, I think, less than $200 on it. And, you know, I was able to make a lot of projects off of it, and I'm still using it in my shop today. I'm sure someday I'll upgrade it, but, you know, it's one of those tools that I just fell in love with doing. And, you know, there would be projects where it's like, hey, I really need this tool to cut down wood for this or that. And so, you know, as my skills grew, you know, as my shop grew, when we built, you know, I thought, hey, I have room for more stuff now. I have room to make furniture, and you know, I built a couple tables for our house. And you know, I think just, you know, as your skills progress, as your name gets known, you know, you start getting those clients and whatnot. You know, it has encouraged me to stay at it since, you know, customers have been satisfied with the work. And I really want to be able to provide that service for our community. when somebody needs custom furniture, I want them to think of the Farmhouse Workshop. I want them to call me up, and I want to be able to deliver a product that they're just super happy with.
Well, and here's the thing, I'm not disregarding the work that people do in industries and in factories, but I'll never forget, Zach and I worked in the same factory together. I think, Zach worked longer than I did, but we used to work for this company in a factory that my twin brother still works for now. And I also go back to stores like a Walmart or places like that. When you go buy like a desk or a table, and I'm not disregarding it, but you have to admit the materials that they're made with are just not the same. Like if Sam Kessler made me a teacher desk at school, or Zach Simpson did, that desk from that point on is going to mean something more to me, and it's going to be made more carefully than a desk on an assembly line. Like you guys have seen that kind of packed sawdust sort of desk where it has like the outside liners, but you tear it apart, it's really just smashed, and it breaks so easily. So, and I get those things still have utility, but when you think of like objects in your house that are custom made, like if Sam Kessler makes me something for my house, a dining room table or something, like there's some kind of intrinsic meaning behind that I think that we forget. Now, Sam, I have kind of this is philosophy, but it's also rather scientific. And again, you may not want to stretch it this far. So again, I might be stretching way too far here. Now, when you said that there's something within us that we should want to work, we should want to enjoy work. And I don't mean like slave labor kind of work, but really meaningful work on there. I feel like deep down, is there something evolutionary about it? That's what I wanted to ask you about this, because in regards to tribal, like evolutionary, like where men would hunt, women would gather, and I don't mean this as a sexist thing. I mean this for men or women. Is there something within us in an evolutionary way that where you and Zach get so much enjoyment out of building things with your hands? Do you think human beings have always kind of been that way, and you've inherited that from that history?
I would say I want to attack that on a couple different levels here, if that's okay. If you think about early man, hunters and gatherers and whatnot, if you didn't work, you didn't eat. If you didn't work, you didn't have shelter. If you didn't work, you didn't have clothes. If the women didn't go out and hunt, they were still working. They were raising kids, and man, that is a completely different category of work that I'm not going to even get into here. So I think in that regard, we have always had it within us that, work is necessary. And I think we've strayed really far in our modern society from that type of work. I mean, hey, if I don't go to work, I might not get a paycheck, but hey, Walmart's down the road. And as long as I got money, I can, or Kroger or wherever, I can go get groceries, I also think from a biblical perspective, I believe that, God created man to work. If we look back at Genesis 2, he puts Adam and Eve in the garden. And what's he tell Adam to do? He says, this is your land, take care of it. And, when sin entered the picture, the Bible says that, man had to deal with weeds growing out of the ground. The farming became harder. The animals, I think, became more wild. I think, if we look, in a spiritual sense, there is something within us spiritually that gives us that satisfaction. So I don't know that it's just evolutionary, but when we talk about the satisfaction that you get, if you just make something from scratch, whether it is in the kitchen or whether it is in the workshop or, if it's art that you're making, there's some satisfaction that you get, even if it's not perfect, that, hey, I actually made this, right? So I think from an evolutionary standpoint, sure. And I think from a spiritual standpoint, for sure.
What about you, Zach? How do you feel about is this something that man has inherited from man, this urge?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I could have said it better than what Sam just did.
That's
that was incredible. But I don't know, man. It's just, I don't know if here's the deal. Like sometimes, I know plenty of people out there that don't do the things like we do that still find satisfaction, with what they do. So, but, I do see Sam's point, about how, work is essential, that we were created to work. So, I mean, I really don't know. It's something that's, like I said, I couldn't have said it better than what he said. That was great.
Yeah, and Sam, I just wanted to tell you, like, thanks for like enlightening me on it too, because the way I asked that question, I made it sound like I'm disregarding the spiritual aspect of this. And you make a great point that there is something within the human spirit, and maybe that's what I mean, more of that intrinsic thing, because there is something within it. When I think of the older term of like sloth, or something like that, or even like getting into gluttony, even though I know that has to do more with like gorging things and things like that. I do think we're not made to do that, because when I often teach philosophy in school, I'll bring up how Aristotle says that as human beings, we're not meant to spend long periods of time alone. We're meant to be social beings, because as he said, you should either be considered a beast or a god if you can make it on your own. We're not supposed to be that way. But I also feel the same way about work. Now Sam and Zach, like I'm probably going to ask you later to come back in the fall. I want to do a philosophy episode over work in general. And Zach, you made a good point too, is this particular question doesn't have to just go with woodworking. We could have called this episode creation or something like that, just to create something. Like I create, YouTube videos off this podcast to painstakingly edit the videos. It's work of some kind, but it's not the kind of noble work that I feel like I wish I could do what you guys are doing. But at the same time, I'm kind of naive and ignorant for saying wish, because I have the power to do it, to start doing something like that. It's weird, because when I hear people say, "Oh, I wish I could do what you do," as though you were great, like just given the gift from God to just automatically just do it. And I think people don't really mean it like that literally, but there is kind of an envy factor to it. Go ahead, Zach.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, Robbie. I'm sorry, but I think a lot of times too, it goes on. I don't want to necessarily say how you're raised, but what you see from a young age. Like I was saying, I saw work from a young age. And I started working when I was 13 years old, or maybe 14. Either way.
I think you were the first one in our group of friends to work.
Yeah.
I remember that.
So, like I said, that's something that my mother and father always instilled in me. You got to work. You got to work. You got to work. You got to work. And I'm so grateful for everything that they instilled in me, because that's the mindset and philosophy that I have. But now I'm doing a different type of work, but it's still considered work to me. So, but like, I'm glad Sam said that, because when you first asked that question, I immediately thought of the Captain John Smith quote, that if you don't work, you don't eat. That's something that immediately came to my head, and he said that. And, because then in the early English settlements, you had, the gentlemen, you had the commoners. The gentleman was more of the nobleman, and then you have the commoners who did the work. And so that's the biggest thing that came to my mind.
It's funny. I have AP training next week again for the second year in a row, and the professor that trained us last summer, he asked all of us. We're all supposed to be relative experts in history, and he asked us all, in the Middle Ages in a village, who is the most valuable person in a village? And I mean everybody, including me. We were all guessing, like all 18 of us were guessing all kinds of stuff, like carpenters and just tons of things, farmers, all these things. And he just kept saying no. And when he said the answer, it was just so obvious. I felt so stupid not knowing it. And he said blacksmith. He said, you can't forget the blacksmith was the most important person, because you couldn't get anything done. Because we all thought farming, but he's like, well, who makes the tools? And who does all this stuff? And without that person, and if your town blacksmith dies, you got to go to the village or guild nearby to try to coerce them. So it's amazing how the roles in society has changed. And Sam, you brought this up earlier, because I want to do an episode down the road on automation. Now, I'm a big technology guy. I love computers. I love all that stuff. But I would be lying if I didn't say there was a part of me that's a little bit worried about increased automation, because you do have unskilled jobs and people that are in need of those kind of things. So what happens when every cashier at McDonald's becomes a tablet, or Walmart? Because you can see it. It's happening every year, is that slowly but surely all cashiers will be phased out, and we'll just be self-checkouts and all things. But there's people that will need those kind of jobs so then I guess what I'm saying is, does it become our responsibility of humans, not just for ourselves, but to help everybody within our tribe or our community to become as knowledgeable and, I guess, skilled as absolutely possible for them? Because that's what I say to my students is, I want you to be as skilled as you can, so you can fight for those jobs out there. Because, we'll talk about Logan Aluminum, a famous aluminum factory here in Logan County. I was like, well, many of you say, I'm going to get out and go to Logan, but they don't realize the competition that's involved in that. Like, you got to take a test to even get in. And then you get people from an hour away or more that's competing for that same job with you. You have different races and nationalities that come. You have kids that will do engineering and medical fields overseas and then come to America and then try to compete. So I think it's the job of the individual to make yourself as marketable as possible. And I think that's a responsibility. So I guess what I'm ultimately getting here is to add to this question, do both of you agree that we should have a responsibility as human beings to be virtuous when it comes to doing these kind of things, to be active, to be willing to work, not necessarily work to keep from suffering, but working out of enjoyment too?
I kind of want to circle back to something kind of in our previous conversation. You mentioned sloth, and have you ever considered that maybe sloths aren't lazy, but they're just very, very, what's the word that I'm looking for here?
Patient.
I was gonna say, maybe they're very deliberate about the actions they make, And so I think, as much as we're made to work, I think we're also made to rest. And so I think there has to be that balance, or else you just get into burnout. I know you did a podcast last week with some first year teachers and surviving that first year. And it's like, if you can survive that first year of teaching, like, your life's going to be a million times easier the second year and the third year, And so I think when you kind of get into this idea of like, Zach, you mentioned like instilled that work ethic within you, like that's a wonderful thing. But at the same time, I think we have to be able to have those outlets as well. And for us, one of those outlets is a form of work, which I think is an awesome thing. I also want to say this on it. Back, I used to play in bands around town and whatnot. And I had a buddy who was at one of the venues that we were playing. And I started talking to him and, I asked him, I said, hey, have you ever thought about playing music, or do you play any instruments? And he said, nope, I just enjoy listening to people who do. And that has always stuck with me. He said, I don't need to play guitar because I have so many talented friends who do, and I get enjoyment out of that. I think along those lines, if everybody started woodworking, if everybody started painting, if everybody started doing whatever and doing everything, what happens to the skills that I have? They become devalued, right? And so I think when we have this idea, like, yes, you should work and you should have what you're good at. But like you were talking about with the older civilizations, you had a specialty, hey, you were the blacksmith, you had the pub, you were the person who, built buildings, or you were the person who fixed the road. I mean, you had that job, you were the farmer, you were, and you might not have farmed everything, but you had livestock, or you had, crops or whatever that was. And so I think, that's a really good way. I love the idea of being a Renaissance man, but at the same time, you get into the idea of you're the master of none. And I don't want to be a master of none. I want to be a master of something. And finding that thing that fits might take a few attempts there.
Yeah.
I think trade schools are excellent. I think trade schools are one of the greatest things that high schools have ever added. Because we talk all the time to our kids, we have to have people that learn those trades. That's a great point, Sam. We need carpenters, we need, electricians and, all these different jobs and
mechanics.
Yeah. Mechanics, yeah, absolutely.
All three of us, we were from the generation, even though Sam's a little younger than us, Zach, but we were from the generation that made you feel like you had to go to a four-year college. Everybody was pushing to just do a four-year degree. But like Sam said, if everybody has a bachelor's degree, then the value of the degree loses its utility. And man, you're right, Zach. Our school system, we're lucky. We have a really good trade school system. The CTC is fantastic. And you have to have those kind of jobs. And the thing is, those jobs are not devalued. And again, learning those kind of skills, and there is some kind of a prideful thing. And I'll go over there on planning sometimes and just walk around and see the work that teenagers are doing. And I just had two former students last week literally did a signing day. I don't know if you saw that on social media, where they do those now, not just for athletes, but they got hired with the certificate and they have no college debt. And they're able to get a job that gets paid more than I started out as a teacher. How cool is that to get into that? So I think it's one of those things. Now, another way of doing this is that, as we all know, the world is ever changing. It's changing around us all the time. So maybe as human beings, we have to be willing to adapt to the change too, and to see, especially if you're doing this for money, if you're working for that. Okay, so I have another difficult question for you. I'm going to start with you first this time, Zach, and then I'll go to Sam. But I'm highly interested in both of you because, we're all teachers, but you both do extra stuff too. So Zach, you balance a head coaching job. So you head coach girls basketball, which I know from assistant coaching that a head coach is a lot of work. And you're an elementary school teacher. So I know that you started woodworking really a lot more during the coronavirus quarantine time. So I have a devil's advocate question for you both. So for many of our listeners like me that are also starting out doing this, their concern is that they're not going to have enough time, like Sam said, that I already have work, or I get home and I'm tired and I just want to eat. But at the same time, I want to do something more like this, maybe not woodworking, but something. But in this case of this podcast, let's say it is woodworking. What advice do you have, Zach and Sam, on how do you guys find a delicate balance between work and doing woodworking?
Oh gosh. And you're right. I did a little bit of it in the past, but I did recently start during the quarantine with COVID-19, and time was obviously on our side, especially as teachers. I would always, obviously do our virtual learning, and then, kind of work on at the bottom. And then when school let out, I kind of got into it a little more. The biggest piece of advice I would say is, again, don't be too, if you're just starting out, don't be too ambitious. Again, Sam made a good point about starting small, and, don't go out and rush out and think you have to buy every piece of equipment and every piece of tools. And, but again, have a plan. I think having a plan in anything in life, not just woodworking, having a plan is crucial. It's a key to what you're doing, but at the same time, don't spend too much time on it, because, again, resting is important as well. So just the planning, it was me, because there were many times I went out in the garage, I started to build something, and I'm like, if I just would have planned this out, it would have turned out so much better. And actually it would have saved me some stress, in which I was trying to go out there to be stress free. But again, I think when you're building stuff for people other than yourself, that mindset can kind of change a little bit. But I think the planning aspect would be the biggest piece of advice I can give. So.
For me, if you're starting out and you're worried about, time or materials, I think Zach hit the nail on the head. Don't worry about tools. Like tools are probably the least important part of your workshop. You can pick up a good circular saw for $50, like in a drill for another $60. And you can make so many things with those two tools, So when you think about like all the stuff that you can do with the tools, with very few tools, it's really powerful. And if you just go say, hey, I want to go make something out of wood, like what's the point of that? Like, make something that you need, figure out that, like Zach, you said, hey, I'm going to build a coffee table, and because you're like, hey, you're not going to tell me that I can't do this, right? Hey, I need shelves put up on this wall, and I'm not going to go buy that, cheap wireframe stuff that, people install in their closets. Like, I want something that looks nice, and I'm going to go do that. Right. And, I'm going to do my research online. I'm going to figure out what materials I need. If I need a saw, or if I need a driller, if I need start with that stuff, start with the utility stuff that you're going to use around your home. I would say, do not start off saying, hey, I'm going to make this stuff and I'm going to get rich from it, because you're not, especially beginner work. But there's no reason that a beginner can't make something that's beautiful. I think the more you do it, the more you learn, the faster, the easier the process becomes. Your work improves in quality because, you've made the mistakes in the past, like we talked about earlier. You know what to not do. But when it comes to that barrier there, I would just say, find a specific project, and I was looking at my shop before we started this. Along one wall of the shop, I've got thousands of dollars worth of tools sitting there. And I don't say that to brag or anything. I just say that to say that's, what I need in order to run my business the way I want to run it. But that being said, I didn't start off with all that. I started off with a circular saw and a miter saw. I had a really cheap battery operated drill. It wasn't a driver. It just drilled holes. It did a really poor job of putting screws and stuff. And over time, as I've sold projects, as I've felt the need for a new project, you can just slowly start to accumulate small tools that would make your process better. And so, really that takes away that initial upfront cost of, hey, I'm going to go out and buy a $2,500 table saw to sit in my shop, or even a $250 table saw to sit in my shop, because that's not a small chunk of change for a lot of people. So, you can do a lot of work with a circular saw and a square and a drill. I mean, really.
Well, I'm glad you said it because that's actually what I have, Sam.
Perfect. You can make all kinds of stuff then, Robbie. Yeah, you're ready to go. Ready to go.
I like where you had said that. I mean, it's not just about having money, because I know that. Okay, Sam, you have a business, obviously, and Zach, you're really just now starting your money making part of doing it, and joining your wives with the whole venture, the Simpsons venture, which I'm going to show here in a little bit for both of you. But it's not just like, if you have the money, it's not just about gaining capital through that way. Now, Sam, you do have some capital because over time you built it up. But you're saying also think of the pragmatic or the practical part too. Is like, go ahead and buy based on what you need, and knowing that you're going to also use it in other parts of your home. And you're saying that the natural progression, not a get rich quick scheme, but the natural
Not at all.
you're going to get more capital over time. And I know, Zach, you definitely have just shown me your garage from a year ago, seeing it to now. But Sam, if I ever am lucky enough to see your workshop, I mean, I'm sure it would be mind-blowing for me, because I still remember your small house that you rented back in Bowling Green. So it's weird to see those two different kind of worlds change just over a decade. So if my thing is, and especially if you're doing it for yourself, then what's the rush? Like, I feel like if you really are doing it for you, then what's the rush of an individual really doing that? So it means a lot that you guys had jumped into that. So I have a much smaller question for both of you now, but I'm sure that your story behind it might be more elaborate. So my question for both of you is, what has been, looking back, what has been your most meaningful piece that you've made, and why? What makes it so meaningful to you?
You want to go? You want to go?
I don't, yeah, no, I have a very general answer. So if you've got something specific, you go for it, Zach.
Well, no, man. The coffee table that still sits in my living room is very important to me, just because it's the first piece I ever built. I actually just finished a set of cornhole boards that I gave my father and mother that I posted today.
Those look nice.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Work on those, yeah.
Appreciate it. And, I was able to give that to them as an anniversary gift. Their anniversary was this past few days. But I think, those are super meaningful to me. But kind of a little kind of story, not really a story, but kind of to tell you, if I look at my most meaningful, it's not really been a piece, it's been a project. And that's screening in our porch. That was something that was absolutely just tested every bit of patience that I had. And to the framing, to the drilling, the learning about how to drill into concrete, learning how to drill into brick, learning, the attaching the 2x4s. When I finished that project, and I built all the stairs myself, I did, the rise and the run, the handrails, the door was the hardest part of it, getting the door exactly where it needed to be. When I stood back and took a picture of the final project, that hands down was the most proud I'd ever been of what I had done. And again, there's a lot more pieces of furniture and things I've done that have been more meaningful, but at the same time, as far as the most proud of my work, definitely the porch screening.
For me, kind of in general, I'm really not that sentimental with my work, which might seem weird, because I do pour my heart and soul and blood and sweat into these projects. But most of them, I know are just going to somebody's home. So whenever I get to deliver furniture to somebody, that brings me so much joy. And a lot of times when I'm sitting there working on a piece, doing something really mundane, like painting or staining or something like that, finishing, sanding, whatever it is, I really try to make it a point to focus and meditate and to pray for the family that's going to. The last dining table I finished up, solid white oak, really turned out nice. I was so happy to get that piece out of the shop. Not because, it freed up space or, I made a little money or anything like that. It was because, man, I know that that's going to bring them satisfaction. So I don't get attached to the pieces that I built. I have pieces that I say, hey, this was my favorite piece of furniture that I made, or this is my favorite little project or whatever. But Robbie, kind of something along those lines. Some of my favorite things that I've built have been for my daughter. And one thing that I always just get that little, touching spot in my heart. She has this little phrase that she always says, working tools. And, Dada's shop, working tools. And so whenever she starts saying that, that just brings me joy, because it's like, okay, my daughter likes what I do, And so the other day I was out in my shop, she likes banging hammers and wrenches and, pretending like she's turning screwdrivers and whatnot. But she sat there and I thought, dang it, like I need to make her something cool. So I just went in the shop. I got some scrap plywood. I've banged together a little frame with some brad nails. Didn't bother to glue it or anything. Popped some 3/8 inch holes in the top and just took a scrap of dowel that I had laying around and I just cut it into little pieces. And I thought, this is just a little fun little toy where she can use one of my rubber mallets and just, bang these pegs in. And every time she does that, working tools. So it's not always the big projects that bring me joy. It's those little ones. I had scrap 2x4 and I just cut them into blocks, put them in a 5-gallon bucket. And she loves to sit on the back porch and just play with those and build stuff. And, we play with trucks on them and, drive, over ramps and all this stuff. So it's like those projects honestly bring me more joy. Those simple little like 5-minute shop projects than the big things that take me, weeks to complete. So
that's awesome.
Sam, that table's excellent, man. I love it. Yeah, that's excellent work. I love it. Awesome.
That was maybe one of my favorite tables that I've done so far. Yeah. This next one going out might be close to it, but that one was, yeah.
Now Sam, nice. Just out of curiosity, do you foresee your daughter as she gets older and gets like her teenage years, early teenage years? Do you see her developing that curiosity and maybe she wants to help dad in the shop or build something else herself? I mean, is there a little dad moment in your back of your head that goes, well, maybe she'll want to kind of follow in my footsteps a little someday?
You say teenage years. I'm thinking it's going to be like way before that. I'm thinking like first grade. Like she can learn to read and she can learn to sand. Like
I don't know.
No, I don't want to ever pressure my children into doing what I do.
Yeah.
I want them to be able to explore different things and find what they like. If it's working tools when she's 8 or 10 or 15 or 25, I would love to have her in the shop working with me. But if she said, hey, like, Dad, you go out there and do your thing and I'm gonna shoot basketball, or I'm gonna go over to the milk barn and milk cows, like whatever it is that she says, hey, this is what I'm passionate about, like that's where I want her to go. But
you're an awesome dad.
If she wants to come in the shop and learn the trade, I would be happy to teach it to her.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that from you. I mean, all of us being teachers, and sometimes you see the opposite of that. Sometimes you see the parents that try to live vicariously through the kid, and you're like, just let the kid live. Let them learn and find their own way. So right. I love hearing that from you, Sam. Okay, so we're kind of getting down towards the end. So just to add a couple more questions regarding woodworking, and then I'm going to throw some 3 random freaking philosophy questions at both of you. So here's something that I want you to reflect on your entire scope. Now, I know, Sam, for you, the scope is it's much deeper on that. So that's a longer time frame. For you, Zach, it's shorter, but it doesn't mean it's less meaningful. But what have each of you, and I'll pick somebody so we're not juggling. So Sam, I'll start with you. What have you learned about yourself through doing woodworking?
So we did a 7 habits training back several years ago. And one thing that kind of really hit me, and this is actually when I decided like I need to do woodworking, is that I kind of did that self-reflection and thought, you know what, I really enjoy working with my hands. And that has not gone away. That has not diminished. So I think for me, it is, gives me the ability, the outlet to actually work with my hands and to create. I've always enjoyed art and design. And so that has been something that, it always gives me something to learn. I'll go ahead and say it, over the next probably year or two, having a new baby to raise, I'm going to have to shift my business focus. And so that's going to be a transition for me. But, for me, I've learned that like my mind's always going, and it's not like in a bad way, but my mind is always thinking about like what's next, or how could I do better, or like what would be a way to improve workflow or anything like that. And so I've found something that I'm really passionate about and that I really want to continue to have this growth around. And I don't ever plan on quitting teaching in order to pursue this full time. But I do want this business side of things to grow. So right now, I feel like I have the skills that I need to make the projects that I want to make. But for me, I've really learned that this is something that I want to pursue seriously, pursue the business aspect of it more than just the making aspect of it. Because it's something that I found that this is a valuable part of my life.
about you, Zach?
I mean, obviously, Robbie, we've known each other for a long time. Sam, we've known each other for a little bit. And if you have truly known me, I'm the absolute last person you think would have ever started something like this. Just because of, I don't know. I just feel like if you knew me personally, you would say this is not something he would ever do. So I don't like sitting still. I don't like, I have obviously my 3 friends over at Real Talk, and I have a bunch of friends that love just sitting down watching movies, and I love those guys. It's hard for me to do that. It's hard for me to just sit down. Now, I will sit down and watch movies, love movies, but it's hard for me to just sit down for a long period of time. I feel like I constantly have to be up doing something. So I think, but at the same time, I keep going back to the patients. At the same time, I'm able to go out in the garage, like Sam said, kind of put priorities. If you're finishing something here, you can do this later. It's kind of taught myself some organizational aspects that I don't have. And again, if you knew me, I'm obviously not the best organizational. My organization has never been my strength. So it's kind of taught me some of that as well, because I know that my garage has to be organized, and it's a lot easier for me to work that way. So patience, organization, and it's teaching me a lot about myself that I didn't already know, or that I didn't know about myself. So that's really, it's kind of, I'm learning more every day. I'm enjoying it so much, and so that's pretty much it.
Well, the one thing I'll say on that is when I kind of talking about learning every day, learning something new. Zach, you mentioned earlier in the podcast, every time you go out, you say, well, today I'm going to try and get better at this, or I'm going to learn this. The one thing that I'm really excited about learning and maybe seeing if I enjoy it or not is working with robots. So I've got two robots in my shop right now, and I've used one extensively with my laser engraver, and I just got a CNC router maybe 2 months ago, and I've barely used it because I've been so backed up with furniture and whatnot. But just that need to, like you said, Zach, just always be moving, always be trying to learn something new, whatever that next step is, I always want to be taking that step,
Absolutely. Definitely.
Well, I appreciate both of you sharing that. And it seems like both of you have really recognized something within yourself that over time you've grown. And I like how Sam, it wasn't just about making stuff, but also, and I don't know if I wouldn't say it was only because of your math background, but wanting to take it to the route of business and starting to get into business management with it was great. So both of you have been very ambitious with it. And I respect that wholeheartedly. Now, especially for me, just a personal struggle over the last couple of years, I've had a personal struggle with depression, especially self-worth. Now, I'm not saying that this is a total fix to something like this, but for both of you, if an individual, let's just say, doesn't have a hobby, doesn't have a side project, might have a job, or they may not even have a job on there, but they battle really strongly with a sense or a lacking of self-worth. Do you think getting into something like this, like woodworking, or at least something creative, do you think it could help try to maybe improve that?
I don't necessarily think, obviously, with us, creating something provides some self-satisfaction. But I don't necessarily think you have to create something in order to have that, boost in self-esteem or whatever. I think you just have to find something that interests you, and find something and find that is very meaningful, but it doesn't have to be woodworking. It can be anything that you find personally, you feel it has a purpose, and that's kind of what I think, and I started woodworking because it was going to be challenging. It was going to be meaningful to me. But again, I think if you have, stuff going on like that, just find something that's meaningful and you're passionate about. I'm passionate about teaching. I'm passionate about coaching basketball, and I found this new passion with woodworking. So that kind of keeps me saying, you know what, I'm constantly finding meaning within my life. And I feel like, I'm consistently finding that about myself.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. What about you, Sam? Individual that may be struggling with self-worth, could woodworking enhance that?
Well, Robbie, first I want to say I applaud you for being open about your struggles over the past couple years there. I think when people are open about their struggles with their depressions, with their anxieties, whatever it is, it makes other people realize that I'm not alone in this, and I think you're going to get more people reaching out to help than you are going to get people criticizing you for it. Because I think we're learning that that's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
We go through these periods in life where we just need help. We need something, right? So I just want to start with that. I will say this, for me with woodworking, it wouldn't be satisfying in and of itself. And the reason I say that is if I was just out in my shop making stuff for people, delivering it to their homes, like that's really not bringing me, other than, the joy that I get from that. It is a lonely place to be sometimes. But I found the community in Instagram to be super uplifting. Followers are a number. I know I'm getting close to 3,000 followers. I'm about 50 away right now, which is, I think, pretty cool. And most of the people that follow me are fellow woodworkers who just say, hey, I like what you're doing. Like your work is worth me looking at. Or when I get likes or when I get comments, like to me, that's beneficial. That encourages me to keep going. As a woodworker. I also think, being in a good state, like I find people with 100 followers and I, comment on their stuff. Hey, looks good. Like, your work is really progressing. Like just being uplifting to other people, I think is a big part of, making our society better. So, if you said, hey, like I'm struggling with this or that, or like, with self-worth or whatever it is, should I start woodworking? My answer would be no. But like Zach said, find something that you're passionate about and find community around that. If you don't have community, like life is hard enough to go at it alone. But if you say, hey, like I've got people in this with me, whatever that looks like, then that's awesome.
I love that because you're kind of bringing in utilitarianism and tribalism and altruism together. I don't think that something has to necessarily be altruistic to make you feel good, where you're only doing it for the benefit of someone else and expecting nothing in return. I think it doesn't have to be like that, but I appreciate what you said, Sam, about what I brought up earlier about my own kind of flaws that I've dealt with. But I agree with you. I think there is something rather tribal, or the community aspect is really important. I think that's one of the reasons why I like to teach, is because I like to feel like I'm doing better than, not just for me, I want to be helping other people. And I think that's ultimately what drove all of us to get to that particular point. Now, to finish up the, I guess, the woodworking aspect of the conversation, I guess I want to finish with is just some overall advice. So let's just say that we do have a few listeners. And what's so cool about these podcasts, not that you would want to hear your own voice, that many years from now, because you might be like me where you hate the sound of your own voice, but someone could listen to this or watch the YouTube video 5 or 10 years from now and still get value out of this conversation. That's why I like philosophy, because it doesn't matter when you're having it. But let's just say that we are having a listener on YouTube or on the podcast that has never done this kind of thing before, but they are considering it, like strongly getting their first few tools, starting like a small little project at home that's useful, but they're very nervous and apprehensive about the idea of doing it, stepping out of that comfort zone. Well, what's some final advice, starting with you, Sam, that you would have for our listeners that are considering taking that leap of faith, but they just haven't quite done it yet?
So my biggest advice is find somebody who's been there. Your first year of teaching, you get partnered with another teacher to say, hey, like I'm a veteran, like I know what to do. Like if you need me, come talk to me, right? Find somebody who's done it. If you ever want to reach out to me, you're more than welcome to. I've had several former students who said, hey, like I'm starting woodworking, like what tools do I need? Or like, how would I go about this project? And I'll say this, like the woodworking community is a super helpful community. And there have been people that I've had to reach out to, like, how would I go about this? Or what hardware should I get for this? Or where are you ordering your, material from? Or there's all kinds of communities online that are beneficial. But if you can find somebody and learn in their shop with them, you'll progress way faster. If I hadn't taken that class at WKU and fine woodworking, like that's where I learned a lot of skills. I learned some skills as well from my grandfather back when I was younger. But if you can find somebody that's like willing to teach you something, like that's going to be more valuable than watching a million YouTube videos, because you're getting the hands-on learning there. And I know we all know how important, hands-on practical learning is there. So,
Yep.
like never like in kind of what Zach said again, be able to plan a project before you ever start it. That's going to save you so much time. And then the other thing, last thing I'm going to say is find a project that you want to do, right? Whether it's a shelf, whether it's a coffee table, whether it's, just something completely random that you said, hey, here's this really weird thing that I found online. I'd like to try and make it because I think it looks cool. Find that project and then figure out like what steps do I need to have, what skills do I need to have in order to make this thing. That would be kind of my advice to somebody who's saying, hey, I'm about to start off here.
Fantastic. I love it. Zach, what about you?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Network. Again, like Sam said, find some people that's kind of doing in the same boat as you. That's why I think this has been so beneficial to me to be able to talk to Sam, and I think the network that I have with him, and, I think it's only going to help me grow. But the biggest thing, stay the course, stay in anything you do. It's not, and again, I know we've kind of shot away from woodworking too a little bit, but anything you do, you have to approach it with an open mind and a positive attitude. That's what I tell my students every day. Approach stuff with an open mind and a positive attitude and be willing to learn. You're not going to know everything right off the bat. It's just the way it is. We don't expect, and I can speak from basketball, we don't expect somebody to come out and be able to, knock down the 3-ball, or we don't expect somebody to come out and be able to be the best rebounder, but we want them to understand that and to learn, and, always be open to constructive criticism. If somebody's telling you something, understand that they're trying to help you. I think too many times we're trying to say they're trying to attack. No, they're not. We're, us three right here, this is what we do for a living, so we help people. So again, I'm with Sam, when I start to learn my craft, even if you're just now starting out in the woodworking hobby or whatever you're doing, I'll be glad to help because I'm in the same boat as you. I've really been taking this seriously for about 2 or 3 months now. So I'm here. You can, follow me on Twitter. You can do whatever. I'd love to talk to you. Absolutely.
Sam, did you want to add anything based off of his answer?
I was going to say this. I think we've talked about this earlier. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. If you make a wrong cut, like you can go buy more wood. Just don't cut your fingers off. Like be safe. Like more than anything in the shop, like be safe. If there's something that you don't feel comfortable doing, or like in the back of your mind, you're wondering like, man, is this like really a safe thing? Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Just put the tools down and don't do it. Ask somebody like, hey, how should I go about doing this? And it might be like, hey, you need to start over. But it might be just, hey, you could hold the tool this way and then you could get to, oh, okay, yeah, great. But that would be my thing. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. When people asked me to make my first table, which was my wife, I was like, yeah, I can do that. And it was not perfect at all. She was happy with it, but it was not perfect, But if I told my wife, like, I can't do that, I would have never, gotten to where I am in my business, because that's a lot of what I do is make dining tables and dining sets. But don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm gonna give it a go, and we'll see where that is.
That's great. And again, I appreciate both of you for the time that you've invested in the podcast tonight. I do want to do the social media share thing, but I want to do one more discussion real quick over a source that I found that I wanted to surprise both of you on. It was an article that I came across to about a year ago. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the listeners and for you both as well. I'm going to take over yours. So there's our agenda, but I came across this academic article that was entitled Passive Therapeutic Gardens, a study on an inpatient geriatric ward. And I'll put a link to this abstract in the podcast.
How did you find this?
Okay, so I actually found this. Weird. Yeah, I actually found this or heard about it on another podcast. I was listening to, I think it was Very Bad Wizards, another philosophy podcast, but one of the psychologists mentioned about this. So then I went looking for it because I thought the general premise was so great. Well, okay, so I really became interested because, as both of you know, my older brother had a really bad stroke last year, and it looks more and more like he's probably going to spend, if not the rest of his life, then most of his life in a nursing home. And I started looking at, well, what do people go through in the nursing homes and the elderly people go through? And there is a sense of self-worth gets damaged, and there's a lot of isolation and loneliness that goes there. Well, and there might be some things I might mistake, and so I'm going to paraphrase and just kind of sum it up, that this was a European study, and that there's been lots of problems with death rates were high, depression was high, suicidal tendencies were high within an elderly population within a I guess we'd call like a nursing home here or a rehab center. So one of the doctors had an idea where they would take the patients that were healthy enough outdoors once a week to actually create their own gardens. And then, like, as you know, Zach, because you're a garden guy too, and I think, Sam, you probably have done some of this before, and they would tend to their own garden, having a responsibility, something they create and something they nurse for. You know, it's a similar therapeutic way for people that have animals, some pets sometimes. So they started doing this, and they noticed over a course of time that I guess their self-worth and their confidence in their behavior and just their overall outlook on life started to improve. And I know a lot of this is qualitative data and not quantitative, but you still can't deny that I think there's something kind of meaningful about this study. And I'm not here to question the validity or credibility of the study, but I wanted to toss this over to you and just get your thoughts on, and I'll go back to the regular screen mode here. You know, when you hear studies like that, you know, even though it's a strange article, does it surprise you is my question. When you hear problems like this in nursing homes and what my older brother and other people would go through, are you surprised to know that, well, once they had a project or something they would work on, their attitudes changed? Well, what do both of you think about that?
I think Zach talked about, our need for purpose in life, and, giving somebody a reason to get outside is a wonderful thing. I think anytime that we're more connected with the natural world, whether it be through working with natural materials like wood, whether it be with a garden, whether it be with taming a dog and having it, sleep at the foot of your bed, like anything that connects you a little bit closer to nature, taking hikes, going fishing, anything like that, naturally, for some reason, it boosts our spirits. Even if you say, hey, I'm sitting out here on the lake and I'm not catching a dang fish, like something about being outside, outdoors, more connected with the natural world, I think is a wonderful thing. So in that sense, it doesn't surprise me, but the sense of purpose that would give you, we garden as well. We got some chickens back during quarantine. I built a coop for them. And so we're going to be getting some eggs here in about a month. I think they'll start laying. But having that sense of I made this happen, it is a really, I think deeply rooted thing within us. Like we've kind of talked about, our need for work, even if my work looks different than your work, even if I'm just going out and picking tomatoes, like, hey, that's benefit. And then what happens with all that food? I would be really interested to see what this facility looks like. Did they take it and distribute it? Did they cook it in the cafeteria? What did all that look like? But I think that's an awesome project.
And Zach, I do want you to go just to add something off of what Sam had brought up before, is that, Sam, you brought up something about, getting energy, feeding off of like working with other people, being around other people. I think all three of us can probably agree with this. In some way or another, all three of us did distance learning this last spring, where we had to do the Zoom stuff, the Google Hangout stuff. And you both know that I'm very debate and discussion based as a teacher. I mean, half the time my class looks like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, just the way it's set up. But and I'll say this is that I do like the option of Zoom and Google Hangouts, and I like the option of watching YouTube videos. But I don't know about you, but there's just something about, I'm only speaking from a teacher perspective, about being in person with students in a classroom, sitting and looking at their ugly faces, and they look at my ugly face, and we talk to each other's mouth holes. There's just something different and more meaningful about doing it. There's a different energy there. And I agree with what Sam said, something about connecting with nature. And this is what I meant jokingly about the human Swiss Army knife, because I've known Sam for many years now, and it's like you go hiking, you do all these other stuff. You're a very ambitious person. You don't seem like you like to stay idle for very long, but at the same time, you value rest. And I think that's really important. So I like that about what you had said about there needs to be something that's more meaningful, because I do think in our society, sometimes we disregard elderly people, like towards the end of your life. And it's easy to put out of sight, out of mind. And I just found, things like this, no matter what age you are, that's what I mean. And one more other thing to add before you, Zach, just to bring a little history and philosophy in. About a week and a half ago, I made a Facebook post about nihilism. Nihilism is a school of philosophy that I worry about a lot, because nihilism is really the absence of meaning. And then I got a little bit of some clapbacks for that, some criticism saying that, well, nihilism on itself, on its surface, is not really that bad, to say that you don't think that there's meaning in things that previously had meaning. And this is not just with religion, it's with a lot of things. And I guess what I mean is, well, maybe you can argue that nihilism is in itself not necessarily always bad, but where you had said earlier about this, Sam, and what Zach said earlier in the show about having an aim or a purpose, I guess that's where I get really worried. Being a historian, nihilism and anger mixed, along with not having an aim or a true purpose in life, I think that's where it gets really dangerous. And if not for people around you, then at least it becomes very dangerous for yourself. And I say that, as you both know, as a teacher, in the last 2 years, I've lost 4 students, and 2 of those were from suicide that I had in class and I became close to and attached to, that one felt like they had the whole world figured out, and the other one wore her emotions on her sleeve. But yet, this is where I get worried about nihilism. Not to say that that's what the cause of those things were, but I do think we're all meant to have some kind of purpose or aim in life. So I do see this article as something that's very important. And I know that in a vacuum, it seems very important. It's not just for elderly, but I'm seeing even for a kid. Like if you have a little daughter or something, she gets up older, make a little garden together, tend to the garden together, make it a family thing. And that's one of those things where it's like, there's something meaningful behind that. And you're raising them from an early age that you don't have to have a lot of money, you don't have to have a lot of this, but having some kind of responsibility is really important for your self-worth. Zach, going over to you, just that same question in the end. The article in itself, you can try and talk about that if you want to or not. Just, are you surprised by the fact that the positive nature of these elderly people improved over time because of this?
Well, I mean, no, I don't think so. Gardening, just from a specificity, gardening is fantastic. But I love being outside. I love being outdoors. I love anything I can do outdoors, whether it be working on my house, whatever it is. Put me outside. That's my happy place. That's my therapeutic place. But what you were saying about how you tied that in, I'm a firm believer of you are a product of your race. But that doesn't mean that you have to stay that way. I mean, you obviously can overcome some different things. But no, it doesn't surprise me at all. Again, connecting with that outside world, there's a sense of satisfaction. When I'm outside gardening and, I put the pants on, I get the gloves on, and when I see, even from doing my front lawn, when I see something grow and blossom, and it's just that sense, I'm like, you know what, I did that, that was me. But at the same time, like, well, obviously I didn't, I'm watering it, I'm taking care of it. So no, that doesn't surprise me at all. No.
Now, again, I do want to show off the social media side of you guys. I appreciate you taking the time to look at that. I kind of forced you to, because I didn't give you an option, but I did at least show you guys at least that kind of side.
I may give you a better answer if I'd have seen it beforehand, Robbie.
Yeah, I know, it's okay. Sometimes I like to show things at you in more of a way of that. So before we go on to our last segment, I do want to show off a little bit of social media, and this means a lot to me because I want to do this more often, because we should show off people that are more visual learners about what people have going on. So I know, Zach, you definitely wanted to show this off. This meant a lot to you in general. So I'll click on it to get a bigger logo. So at the beginning of the show, you did mention these cornhole boards that you just finished recently. Could you give us the story behind these and again, why it meant so much to you?
Well, when I first started, I told myself, I said, you know what? I said, making the cornhole board is something that, like Sam said, you can kind of help people out. People can get outside, they can play, and I looked at it and said, you know what? Because, I got a set a few years ago, and I looked at it, and at that point when I got a set, I said, you know what? I might be able to make one of these or some of these, but I never really got it off the ground. So, I did a little research on the dimensions, what the dimensions should be. And, my wife, Alyssa, is so incredibly talented in the vinyl and crafting business. And so she's created a lot of woodworking things a lot before I did, So those boards right there, I actually was going to create them to kind of be like a display. And I just thought to myself last night, actually yesterday morning, I created them, And I called my wife. I said, hey, can you call me during your lunch? She said, I can't talk. I said, well, I have something important I want to ask you. And at that point, the hole was not cut. The vinyl was not on. It was just a board that had a layer of stain and a layer of finish on it. And so I said, you know what? I want to give these to my dad, and I want to give these to my mom. And I want them, because they just had their anniversary. Father's Day's coming up. My dad loves to play cornhole. When we're having cookouts at the house, somebody always has to bring the boards over here. I said, I want them to have their own set. So obviously I needed to make it happen in a day's time. So I called my wife, and my wife's excellent on the sewing machine. She's excellent on the vinyl. I said, honey, can you help me make this happen? And being the awesome person that she is, she said, yeah, absolutely. We'll do it when we get home. And I actually was over hanging the DVD shelves I just made. I was over at my friend's house hanging those, and she was at home making the bags, and I was putting, and she was putting the corn in them, and she was up there making the decal on her vinyl machine. But again, I was able to bring those. I'm here in Indiana at my parents' house, and I was able to bring those to my mom and dad today. And again, that was just awesome to see what their reaction was, and very, very meaningful. But I was really proud of how those turned out, by the way.
Yeah. And Zach, just to continue on, I love that story behind that. You mentioned the DVD shelves for your friend, who have also, just to preface, so the friend he's talking about is Wes Jones, who we've had on the show now once. When we did the episode over stories, I had the whole cast from the Real Talk, the movie podcast. And I think that's the friend you made this shelf for, right?
Yes. Yeah. He actually asked me, that's actually the second set I made him. I made him one set that's already hanging in this house. Well, actually, both of them are hanging in this house right now. But that's actually the second set I made him. That's one he specifically wanted 4 DVDs. And he has an entertainment system in the middle of his bonus room, and I tried to match the stain the best I could, because that's obviously a factory finish, and it looks really, really good. It turned out really, really well. I love the miter cuts on the trim. I thought those turned out really well. What the biggest challenge with a project like that is getting everything exactly level. Because every shelf, and there may have been an easier way I could have done it, but right now this is all the skills that I have. And, every shelf is made, obviously it's sturdy. It's going to hold a lot of weight. And, I was very pleased. That thing is heavy. It took 2 of us holding each side and one person drilling, because there's little clefts behind them that you hang with on the top and bottom. So we're drilling in, and yeah, it took, those things are heavy as can be.
How many is that out of plywood, or is that out of what's that built out of there?
It's just basic shelving board.
Okay. Good deal.
It's just basic shelving board. Yeah.
I was going to ask you how many sheets you had to break down for it, but
I'll just see. I think I broke down 10, I believe.
Okay.
10 total. Yeah.
Do you want to do a little bit about your teacher desk?
Yeah.
This is your newest one, I think.
That actually right there, I love that. I actually just finished staining it. Haven't sealed it yet. I stained it at the top and painted the legs. And, I'm moving into a new classroom this year. I'm actually I taught 6th grade the past 3 years. I'm going to teach 5th grade now. So I had a brand new classroom, brand new start. And this is when I was just kind of getting involved in the woodworking type thing a few months ago. And I said, and I love the L-shaped desk. And this is going to sound crazy, but as a teacher, I hate drawers. I don't like drawers, because I end up just throwing stuff in them, and they stay so disorganized that I can't stand having drawers. So I said, you know what? I'll build me like a farmhouse looking desk with no drawers, and we'll see how that works out. And again, the desk in my classroom will be more meaningful to me. So I did some research, put some plans, found that online, and built it. I can't remember if I got that on YouTube or online. I can't remember. May have been on YouTube, but again, that was the first time I actually made angle cuts with a miter saw. So, and those 4x4s out there, those are temporary. Those are holding something up so I can get some.
Sam's giving you the stamp of approval, Sam.
Yeah, it looks really nice. Nice work.
I've been watching Sam's facial. I switched off the share screen because I forgot to put where people can still see you guys, your faces while we're talking about these. So I switched that on where we can do that. Now, Zach, I'm going to try to find it, but I thought on your Facebook you did post your porch. Yeah, here it is. I do want to put it all because, man, this blew me away. And when I went over and visited, and Sam's reaction earlier when you said the screening, when I thought of trying to screen in a porch, I thought I would lose my mind if I was trying to in the porch. But
Actually, Robbie, hang on a second. Go back. I think that's what Alyssa. Go back to.
that's Alyssa's. Like I think it's this one.
That's the whole process. Now, I tell you what, the post you were just on, my wife decorated all the furniture I built.
Let me go back and kind of show it real quick.
Yeah, and again, she's awesome at that. Yeah, all the furniture right there I built. That's the outdoor sectional, which is again just made entirely of 2x4s. As a matter of fact, most of that out there is made of 2x4s. The pub tables that's got the bar stools on them, those are made 2x4s and 2x6s. Or no, I can't remember what the tabletops are, but yeah, all the furniture I did out there as well. Matter of fact, in front of there's a kind of a farmhouse looking coffee table in front of that now that I built. So that's actually, haven't posted that yet. But yeah, go back to the actual process of screening the porch.
Real quick, Zach, and forgive me for doing this, but you and Sam can help me on this. Since this is furniture that sits out on your porch and it's subject to weather, is this lumber treated or is it not treated?
No, that lumber, none of that lumber out there is treated. I could have gotten treated lumber, and obviously, treated lumber is a little more expensive, but I was staining that, so I chose to buy untreated and then stain it and weather seal it myself. So I stained and sealed everything myself, which took a little bit of time, but I was able to do that. So I didn't buy the treated lumber. I bought untreated.
If you're working with construction grade lumber, you'll notice that treated lumber, it's super wet when you get it, which is harder to work with. Well, not harder to work with. They actually leave it wet so that it's easier to drive nails into it and whatnot. But when you drive a screw into it, it's going to seep out that moisture. It'll kind of split and crack over time. And the finish on it just never looks as good. So good choice on that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well,
but yeah, that actually was. Go ahead, sorry.
Mention again, just to remind our listeners, you said this all kind of started with a coffee table. And that's why I really want to get you on this podcast, because you went from posting a coffee table months ago to redoing. I mean, all it used to be on this back porch was just the two columns, I think, the two white columns. But and I remember, man, the door part would probably stress me out the most. Is you had gone through these, and I know I'm going through the pictures rather quickly, but you did a great job of showing kind of a time lapse of all of this. I'll go to the point where you kind of finish. Is there things that you want to go ahead and continue saying about this particular project for you?
I mean, stairs take a little work. Obviously, that's the sectional I built, and then when it goes into the actual screening part of it, all that was there was just those two columns. That was it. And then again, that's the door and the fire pit. But that's starting to get to the finished product. There's one picture on there that really gets to if you keep going.
You want me to go back or forward?
Yeah, there it is right there. That's the picture. That's right there. We were fortunate enough with using the product from, I think it was Screen Tight, I believe. They made a vinyl trim that was the same color as the trim of our house, that beige color. So, it looks like right there, that's when I was telling you, that's the most proud I've been of a project. That picture right there is what I took when I just stood there for like 10 minutes and just was in awe of that. Just because, and mainly because my wife said that she wanted this porch screened in, and I was hesitant to see if I could do it. And I looked at it, and the first thing that went over my mind was, man, she's gonna love this, And I really loved it as well. As a matter of fact, we had some friends over, and they were very, very pleased with it. And then the TV's a nice touch right there. And to be honest, drilling, when you're using masonry bits and screws, and that's not easy. But at the same time, it requires a lot of patience, a lot of skill, a lot of strength, but again, that's pretty much the extent of my work right now. And again, I'm learning every day and getting better every day. So,
Well, that's awesome. I'm just so glad you had shared that. Now, Sam, I'm going to toss it over to you again. Looking at your followers, hopefully that our podcast can help give you another 5 or 10 followers, or hopefully more. But I mean, look how close you are to 3,000. It's just so cool to see somebody that I've known for over a decade. You grow this thing from the ground up. It's so cool. Now, again, Sam, I would love to show some video footage too, but you can scroll down and see on his Instagram page. It's super great to go through this. Sam, you can just kind of guide me. Is there any particular pictures or videos you want me to click on to show, and you could talk a little bit about what you were doing and the process?
Really, any of them would be cool. So click on.
Oh, go ahead.
well, skip that one. Skip to the one under the well driller sign.
Well,
And I'll kind of,
oh, yeah.
with that yellow tool right there. So this is just a little time pass video that I like to do. Setting up a biscuit joiner for a table. So this was actually the white oak table that I built and posted previously. But this is one of those things, a lot of people, don't take the time or don't, spend the money on this tool to help keep glue ups from getting kind of funky when you put something in clamps. But this is a tool that I really enjoy using, for tabletops, just to keep, when I put the glue between there, to keep the table relatively flat. And it saves me a lot of time when I'm surfacing a tabletop. You see at the beginning, I didn't cut that out on purpose because that's actually taken a minute to set up the tool. And if you read what I wrote there, adding biscuits to joinery isn't always necessary, but I find that it helps to keep big glue ups from slipping around when clamping. So I always like to give a little insight into what I'm doing on Instagram. So it's not just a video of somebody like using a tool. But, if somebody's sitting there, trying to, learn about the process that I use in my shop, hey, here's a biscuit joiner at work. And do I need one? No, you don't need one, but it can help out down the road. So anyway.
Also, Sam, your tag game is on point.
I appreciate that. I'm still trying to figure out like what Instagram wants. The more that you are on Instagram and on social media, you kind of learn to play by their rules. And Instagram always is changing stuff up on the platform. So trying to keep current with what Instagram's up to has been something for me.
That's great. Is there some other one? I mean, I would like, is this the kitchen, one of your more recent like kitchen?
Yeah, that, I've referenced several times the white oak table that I built. That went to a family out in Olmsted, about 10 miles from my home. And they just built a farmhouse and they're still, finishing a couple things inside and whatnot, but they're all moved in. But the lady that I worked with on this table, had kind of a design in mind. And Robbie, I think you can click through the pictures there with those little arrows. Well, that went to that thing. Go back.
This should take into like another.
Can you hit?
Sorry,
there you go. Yeah. So you can kind of see some of the detail work there in the table and in the legs and all that kind of stuff. But
by the way, this black like pole like in the middle, that's really, I just love the way it looks. I know it serves a purpose too, but I also just think it looks really good with that dark wood.
Thank you. Yeah, she said, I forget what she said. I think refined rustic is what she was after. And so when I was building that table, I wanted the top to be perfectly flat and smooth and all that kind of stuff. But if you keep clicking through, maybe click once more. So you can kind of get a good picture of the tabletop there, but I did do a custom engraving for her on that, did the design work and everything for her. But I thought that bar would be a cool touch. If you're building a table and if I just had the legs, it would have had the tendency to rock a little bit. So putting that bar across there actually adds structural support to it. And you can see it again there on the bench. But if you click off that post and you scroll down through my timeline a little bit, there's the laser working on the table. I did a couple cornhole boards. Click that one that you were hovering over a minute ago. Down one. To the one with like the legs on it. There you go. Yeah, that one right there. Yeah. So on this one, you can see the detailing there on the legs just a little bit more. I was working with 6/4 rough sawn white oak, and I thought, you know what, since she said refined rustic, I wanted to leave just a touch of the rustic in there. And I got that effect there. And if you're just listening to the podcast, you can't see what we're looking at.
Definitely look at the YouTube version later.
It's when I sent this through the planer, a planer is a tool that's going to take off roughness in wood. But when I was getting close to final thickness, I wanted to make sure that on the table legs or on the truss bases there, that I left a few tool marks, not too many and not too few, but a few tool marks in there so that you could see that, yes, this was, made from that rough sawn material, that it wasn't, all perfectly surface lumber when I got it. And that effect really shows up when you apply stain to a piece.
Yeah. Now, Sam, this is just kind of my own curiosity. When based on how pop culture is going and certain TV shows becoming popular, someone pick on one. Like when Fixer Upper became really popular. I know it doesn't exist anymore. That farmhouse rustic thing. It seemed like everybody, especially around this area, really wanted that. So you as a businessman and somebody that does woodworking, do you have to change like what you're doing and research that and kind of pay attention to these changes and what's becoming culturally popular based on the way media is presenting things?
Absolutely. Yeah. If I'm not paying attention to stuff, then like I'm building stuff that nobody's going to think is cool. That's my CNC router that I just got running there, cutting an outline of the shape of North Carolina for just a little wall art piece. But yeah, staying up with design trends is really helpful. I think when I'm building something, I want to build something that is timeless. Like I never get too involved in the like most modern trends because I know that in 10 years, like barnwood's probably going to be going out. So I don't want to just be doing barnwood stuff. I want to make sure that, the stuff I'm doing has a timeless look to it. Robbie, go up just a little bit there. You see a box with blue tape wrapped around it. Yeah. Click on that. So this is a, kind of switching gears. I have a TikTok account. And this is something that I put on TikTok, and I just do TikTok for fun. I don't expect to, sell anything on TikTok or, make any money off of it. But, there's people posting all kinds of silly stuff on there. So I'll put this on TikTok, and I think I've had over 250,000 people with their eyes on this box right here, which is pretty cool. The power of social media. And all I'm doing here, and my wife looked at this, she said, why do people like this? And I just kind of thought, I think it's different. I'm using a weird looking hand saw, and I'm cutting little splines off of miter joints on this box. And so it's something that, is foreign to a lot of people. But making that box was a super simple process. And I don't know that I'm ever going to sell that thing just because it's the first thing that got me traction on TikTok, which was kind of cool.
That's pretty memorable. Now,
yeah.
This is something that maybe we can talk more off air, but now have you ever thought of doing something? Now this would be heavier on the production value part, but on services like Twitch where people stream, you've tested these small videos and they're obviously very popular on Instagram and very popular on TikTok. Have you ever considered doing like a Twitch stream of you doing a plan out, like doing almost like a series of doing something like that? Or is that still something that's like way too much in the production and media value?
So honestly, that's honestly probably more than I have time for right now.
Oh, sorry.
And no, you can, if you can find a way to put that on mute. Yeah. No, that was one that I put on TikTok as well, I think. But which is why it has the music with it. But I have really seriously considered starting a YouTube channel here before too long. Doing videography with my work takes time. And so I don't know how much I want to go into the whole, I am, doing content creation as well, because a lot of the content creators I know in the woodworking space have quit woodworking and they just do content, And they say, they try and, for YouTube, they try and put out a video a week. And, a lot of them talk about, reaching that point of burnout. And I never want to reach that point. That's not really my goal in any of this to become like famous or whatever on the internet. Like my goal is to just provide high quality furniture pieces for people in my area. But I do think that there are some videos that I could put on YouTube that people would really enjoy. That would be helpful for learning different skills. And, some people just like hey, this is how this table comes together,
Yeah.
But again, it's one of those things, from doing the podcast, it takes so long to do video editing.
The video that's so different than audio. The audio
and that's one thing that I just don't feel like I have time for right now. So if I do some YouTube videos, it'll be like pretty simple talking head type videos and that kind of thing. But the live streaming and whatnot, I'll go on Instagram Live once in a while and just talk about what's happening in the shop. I've not done a lot of that lately just because I have been, more focused on getting the furniture out and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, and I always, especially for what you do and people that are interested, those are really good times for Q&As for people to pop in. And I know you can do those live streams on YouTube. But again, I can tell you this, at least with what you do now with Instagram, and I'm not saying that, Farmhouse Workshop needs to try to virtue signal and jump in on the piggybacks of all these other businesses trying hard to jump in on the political realm, as we've seen, lately. For you, and here's the thing: is I'm not saying that your silence with your workshop on the political stuff and the social stuff is at all complicit, Sam, because I know that's not what I'm saying at all. But I will say this: that I do feel like in some ways people have forgotten the original premise of Facebook and Instagram. Is this supposed to be kind of a good community, a scrapbook kind of community? And I have to admit, just from my own personal experience, as a historian and history teacher, it's kind of my job to pay attention to what's going on in the news. So I do get depressed at watching Fox and CNN and everything else and trying to keep up with what's going on, because I know this year is going to be the year of the history teacher. I'm going to get so many questions on what the hell is going on.
For sure.
When
Yeah.
we come back. But you know how refreshing it is to scroll down Instagram sometimes and see like one of your posts. And sometimes it's therapeutic just to see you making something. I'm like, wow, it's so refreshing to not see a super Republican or super liberal post or one people yelling at another group of people, but just to see you making something creative. I'm like, look, Sam made something that's not even political, just post it. So,
and honestly, I really
I
appreciate
love
you saying that, because I never want to be complicit in my message. I always want to put a positive message out in the world, and I don't care about the political left, right, center, whatever it is, right? Because in my mind, if there is care for an individual, right, there will be common ground. Whether or not you want to meet me on that common ground, whether or not you want to understand me, like I want to understand you. And, I always want to put out a positive message. Once in a while, I'll just put back around Christmas, I put up a star that was made from some reclaimed barnwood. We had like a spare little Christmas tree in the corner of our house. And so I made, a real rustic little star. It took me, half an hour in the shop or whatever. But my wife asked me to make it. So I said, sure. And my comment on that was something along the lines of, you don't have to be perfect to be beautiful. And, I think, if businesses, and I'm not saying that this is the only way to do things, but I think if businesses, focus on putting that positivity in the world, like it's going to come back to them, right? Like I think a message of positivity really resonates with people, especially right now when stuff is so polarized and, nobody can get along and everybody has their opinion on something. Like, man, let's just love one another, And so when I use social media, I always want to go about it with that in mind, right? I don't want, I have my opinions on Black Lives Matter and the police and, Antifa and all this other stuff. I have my opinions on that, but I don't feel like that's my place to talk to somebody about that, right? I would rather just, convey a message of love and care for one another.
But those lines are getting, those boundaries are getting grayer all the time, because I mean, and I could say Zach from a coaching standpoint doesn't need to air political things, but you're seeing on ESPN and on Fox that you're seeing head coaches come out and say stuff, and then the ones that aren't saying anything, they're getting chastised for being silent. So this is one of those things where it's like, well, people, not to say it would ever get this extreme in a small area, but people might say, well, how come Sam, the teacher, or Sam, that's Farmhouse Workshop, isn't making a stance on this? Well, then if he's not, then we're just going to boycott his business and blah, 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 blah. Or why isn't Coach Simpson, of the head coach of the team, why is he not? Because he has players that are diverse. How does he feel about this? So it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, we all have a right. We have a right in our Constitution to express these ideas. But I'm just saying, these things in social media, people dog Twitter a lot. And I get this. I love having debates and discussions with people, but I hate trying to do it in 280 characters. I think Twitter is a terrible place to try to have those things. But, Sam, to say that Farmhouse Workshop wouldn't benefit from Twitter, it would. And my podcast benefits from social media from a marketing standpoint. I just think that there's certain platforms you got to be careful about having these kind of dialogues on. But man, I tell you what, tonight has been one of my favorite episodes I've ever done, and it fits so perfectly with my title because I recognize my own ignorance. I know that when it comes to woodworking, I know very little to nothing about it, but I can gain something. Like I know going in, you and Zach know so much more than I do. So I want to soak up like a sponge as much as I possibly can from not just the physical act of making the tangible items, but also just what goes behind your mindset of doing those. So I appreciate both of you for doing that. So before we close up tonight, I want to go to our next segment. So we'll be back in a few moments with that segment. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back for our last segment with Sam and Zach. This is my segment called The Thoughtful Three, just to end the podcast with 3 random philosophy questions that neither one of these gentlemen had a chance to know anything about before. But I think they're going to be fine because most of the questions I asked tonight were not planned either. I just listened to what you guys were doing, and you made the conversation really organic. And I think you make our listeners feel like they were sitting with us and having the conversation. So I'm just gonna start with this. I'll pick one of you to start with, but then the third one will just be like a jump ball. I'm just gonna throw it up, see which one of you get it. So the first one I'm going to do with Sam. So I'm gonna start with Sam, and then Zach, you can respond off of Sam.
All right,
Or
I'm
we can
nervous
do
now.
number 2. So we're good. So you're gonna get a chance to see these. We'll do these, and then we'll do our closing thoughts, and we'll get out of here. So my question to you, Sam, but it's to both of you, is: does creativity recycle itself?
Yeah, absolutely. It recycles itself. You think about the trends, you look at clothing trends. At one point our clothes were creative, and then they said that's out of fashion. And then we come back and it's like, man, like this is what I want. I've seen so many students walking into school with bell bottoms that are like this wide. And it's like, did you go through your grandmother's or your mother's closet? Like, where'd you get those pants, but it's like, oh, this is like the style. This is cool. This is hip. It's like, no, that's groovy, So, there's a book out called Steal Like an Artist. And have you read that one, Robbie?
Well, it sounds like a teaching book, though, is to beg, borrow, and steal. But no,
Yeah,
I haven't heard of that.
No, it's a really cool book. It's like a really short read, you'll flip through it, here and there. But the whole idea behind this book is like, you're not going to create something that's like brand new or like completely original or never thought of before. But I think the challenge with what I do is trying to put my own stamp on it. Like, yeah, anybody can make a table, but like, what am I going to do that's going to differentiate me from somebody else? Like, how is my work just a little bit different than the next guy? Or like, what products do I do that are just, have that slightly different design to them or whatever. But yeah, the whole idea that creativity, man, it's always just kind of coming back up,
So it's pretty crazy because you make a really great point, Sam, because in some ways you're always kind of reinventing the wheel. Like, very few times you're going to come up with something that's so transcending that it's not even close to what anybody's ever thought about before. So I like that you're always kind of building on top of it. Kind of reminds me of that famous quote. I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember it on top of my head, that Isaac Newton said about that we can see so far because we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Yeah, and it's again, like, you can't forget about what was studied and what was invented before you start to create something. Zach, what about you? Does creativity recycle itself?
From a woodworking standpoint, I sure hope so. But every time I go out and work on something, I'm constantly learning and trying new things. This is just me speaking from experience, but from a classroom standpoint, absolutely. I mean, I'm consistently coming up with new ways and to engage kids, and I have to. I mean, being an elementary school teacher, you can't do the same thing over and over again. So, no, I think that's 100% accurate. Well, for the most part, yeah, absolutely.
And I think the more creative you are, the more creative you get.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a contagious aspect, but not in a negative way. Okay, so Zach, you're getting what many of my students every year consider one of the hardest questions to do.
Okay, you might ask me, give me like 5 minutes.
Sometimes the shortest questions are the hardest ones to really explain. And I like this because this is a question, Zach, that could even come up in your 6th or 5th grade class, and it seems so easy. But when you start to explain these to people, it becomes more difficult. So last week when I had John Altman on, I asked him, what is good? And people get overwhelmed by that question sometimes because it can be very subjective or relative to get into that. But I have a different way of asking a short question for you. So your question for you, Zach, and then Sam can reinforce your answer or counter it. And that is, what is simple?
What is simple? Oh, interesting. To me, simple is having the experience necessary in order to achieve a task. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
That's good. That's what I want. First thing that comes to your mind. Sam, what about it? What is simple?
Simple to me does not mean easy. It does not mean easy to do. Simple to me, when I'm thinking as a woodworker, I think about design. And I'm always drawn to a simple design more than a complex, elaborate, ornate. One furniture style that I love, or actually two that I love that I think are never going to go out of style, is shaker style furniture. And when you picture shaker style furniture, probably something comes to your mind, like really
Mhm.
clean drawer fronts, like skinny legs on top of like, a bedside table or something. And mid-century modern. Both of these two furniture styles implement such simple design and such clean looking design. That doesn't mean it's always easy to recreate these pieces, right? But when you look at it, you just think like that just looks good, you know? It doesn't have any embellishments that would distract your eye from the overall piece. It's just good, clean, simple design. So when I think of what is simple, that's what I think of
Yeah.
there.
That's awesome. Both of you did an awesome answer. I don't know why, Sam, but whenever you had started to describe that, I started thinking visually. Have you ever seen those art pieces before on Instagram or something where it basically it's like in an exhibit and it looks like it's just a flat kind of 2D picture, and on the surface you're like, oh, it looks pretty easy, and then the person with the camera starts to go like go
Oh,
to the
yeah,
side,
that
and
stuff is incredible.
it's made out of like 20 to 50 like objects that are
Yeah.
3D, and they're placed in a way that if you stand in one particular spot, it looks perfectly like Abraham Lincoln's face or something like that. And so on the surface, it seems like it could be so simple, but it's actually so complex, and there's so much like thought that goes behind that. That's why I really like the answer.
Yeah. And there's not, it doesn't mean that furniture is always hard to build. It's just like, okay, when you look at, one of those two eras of furniture, um, especially with the shaker style, it was a very utilitarian, design aesthetic that they were going for. And, you know, back in the day, I'm sure they could, build it, much quicker than I could in my shop. But yeah, there are details in there that you don't hardly notice.
Good, very good answers. Okay, so here's the last one, and then you guys are done. You've survived putting it with me for 2 hours. Okay, so here's the thing: is that I'm going to throw an argumentative question at you both. I often throw this up to kids, but I often get it's weird because with a younger generation, I often get the more pessimistic answer or the more cynical answer. Maybe one that maybe Diogenes, the famous Western philosopher that lived in a barrel on his own, like he would have probably said. So this question is just about people in general. And I thought, being teachers, but doing something that you also have to do on your own and be patient is going to be a good question to ask you guys. So when I saw this morning, I thought, man, I have to ask this last. So this is about people in general. The question is, are more people lazy or hardworking?
My gut
Mm.
wants to say lazy. But
Yeah.
here's what I'm going to say. Hard work looks different to everybody. Some guys would come into my workshop and do what I do, and it be a million times easier than I make it. And some guys would come in and they would say, I have no idea how you're doing this. I'm out, I think there are things that, and I'm going to give a pat on the back to the younger listeners here. There are things that younger listeners are good at doing. They make it look so easy that it would take me hours to figure this out. TikTok is one example. Kids can make TikToks in such a short amount of time, and they're awesome. Like, I wish that I could get that figured out. And I'm sure somebody would like, if I could get a 17-year-old to sit down with me, here's how you do it. Like, yeah, that'd be great. But, I think it depends on, if you find that thing that you're passionate about, you're not going to care about the hard work. Mm-hmm. Find that thing that you really want to do. And it's like, yeah, it's hard work, but like, I want to do that hard work because I want to be excellent at this.
Sam, I had a soundbite a few episodes ago that started off the episode where a famous philosopher was talking about how much he hated accounting and he hated math, and he's not that kind of a guy, even though he respects people that do that. But he learned through his life that the thing to do is to find something that you like doing that you can make money for, and then do that thing. And that's kind of what his main premise was in.
Can I diverge real quickly?
Oh, of course.
So Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank, what was it that he started his whole business? Was it Kinko's?
I think it was Kinko's.
Yeah. So he started this whole business. The dude could not read well. He was dyslexic. And so he recognized that flaw within himself. Like, I can't read, but what am I going to do? I'm going to hire people, or I'm going to partner with people who are really good at this, So I'm going to take their strengths, and I'm going to take my strengths, and I'm going to put those together, and we're going to sell this thing for $1 billion to FedEx or whatever it was. So, when I think about hard work, I just think hard work looks so different to so many different people. You look at a stay-at-home mom, and golly, if there's a hard job in this world, that is it. That is hard work. But then when you come home at the end of the day, what do you notice that they've done? Probably nothing, because the house is clean and the kids are fed and the dishes are done and dinner's on the table. So when you just have this idea of like what work truly is, work can look like so many different things.
Yeah. So that's awesome. What about you, Zach? What do you say?
Well,
Average person?
when I think of work, obviously I think of the output of energy. And that's obviously the scientific. I taught science for the past 3 years, so that's a scientific answer. But I think he makes a good point in the fact that well, what does hard work look like? Well, what does lazy look like to somebody? I mean, are you okay? If somebody
It's
lazy,
like the thing that Sam said earlier.
yeah, somebody lazy that sits on the couch and watches TV, or are they really engaged in the task at hand? And their mind is performing work. So I don't know. I mean, or it's hard. Is work always physical labor? So there's a lot of variables in that regards. I mean, just from my standpoint, I guess that's what makes it philosophical.
Well, that's why people love it and they hate these kind of questions, because you guys are both doing a job. You're not mentioning the word, but what you're doing is metaphysics. Both of you are metaphysically defining. Because I think in order to answer this question as a class, we would say, well, I think we need to define what work is and what hard work actually is and what lazy actually is. But why is it, and I feel it too, because I was just like, Sam, why is it that the majority of us, especially my young kids, like in our gut, why do we just assume that it's lazy? Well, why do we divert to that? Is it because hard work is so difficult and maybe it's a little bit more rare? Because I mean, is that saying that maybe we're all a little bit more cynical about humanity in general, at least the state of humanity right now? I don't know. That's why I've always wondered, why are we so quick to say lazy in our gut?
Well, I think that, especially living where we live, I think there's such a bad taste in people's mouth about people who, might not have a full-time job or might not have that traditional profession or whatever, and might receive some help from the government. And so I think people see that and they say, oh, well, you're propped up on welfare or whatever the case may be. But I think we got to stop back and instead of just like immediately jumping to those judgments, actually understand why they're in that position. They might be working as hard as they can to make ends meet, but it's just not quite enough for them to be able to have the life that they want. And so I think we have to be really careful when we say somebody's truly lazy, because man, somebody might be working their tail off 2 or 3 jobs. And man, when we see them, barely walking around Walmart, they might be lazy, or man, they just might be exhausted, and I think our society naturally pushes us towards that exhaustion side of the spectrum. So, I mean, most people I know, most people that I go to church with, most people that I interact with, most of my students, parents are hardworking people. That has nothing to do with their income level or anything like that, And I don't think high schoolers, quite get it either, because, they haven't had I have to, pay rent this month and pay my car insurance and buy groceries and put gas, like they don't necessarily quite see all of that just yet.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier for them to say, oh, people are lazy, but I'm a hard worker,
Yeah.
Hard work just looks different to everybody.
It's weird, because if you would have asked me this question like 15 years ago, when the TV show Dirty Jobs was really popular with Mike Rowe, I love Mike Rowe. He has a fantastic podcast. But when I think of those shows, if you would have asked me back then what I thought hardworking was, it would have been like those. Like and what I looking back and going back now and watching those old episodes now, it's not even the physical jobs that I appreciate as much as his conversations with these people. Like what about him? And that's the thing, is that with our high school students that we have, where I teach mainly sophomores and juniors, that's where they're getting their first jobs, is that you don't typically think of McDonald's as hardworking or working at a grocery store is, but In some ways it is. Yeah. And
Yeah.
some kids, like, you have to remind yourself, what I tell older people that they always tell me, I don't know if you get this, Sam. I get a lot of people that don't teach. They go, I don't see how you do it. I don't see how you just don't kill the kids. And I'm always like, the kids are the best part. The kids are not
Yeah.
the part that wears on you.
The-
Yeah, you can't forget that we were kids once, and you can't forget that.
Often their
that
parents say, you want to.
yeah, especially during the quarantine. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things now where it's like, for some kids, they're, for the first time in their life, they're going to school, getting off, working till 10 or 12 o'clock at night, and then having to get home and do schoolwork. And some of them are panicking, and they do their schoolwork in the morning or right before class starts. And some of the times we as adults, we go, well, this is just life, and it hasn't really gotten that hard yet. But we forget sometimes that for them in that moment, it does seem very difficult. And I'm not saying that we need to walk on eggshells and give them, participation ribbons, but I'm just saying that we can't always forget about, like you said it perfectly earlier, Sam, is we don't really know what other people are going through. And we think we do because of social media. We think we know because of what people post, that's reality. But most of the time people post, the best part of themselves of what they're doing. And we just assume that everybody's lounging it up all the time. But I think that most people are working their asses off most of the time and trying to do their best they can. And I think that there's a smaller minority of people that actually try to cheat the system. I have former students that do social services, and they're very, very prominent, and even privately off the record and stuff, that people really do need this help. People need welfare. People need social services. But there's not nearly as many people that cheat the system as people assume do that. But that's what the cool thing is. If I look at our time, we went into a 9-minute discussion about this question. So it just shows you these questions on the surface seem simple, but this is the reason why I can't wait until a few weeks when I talk to the guy that does philosophy books for children, because I think that you can ask what is simple to a kindergartner and you're going to get an answer. And it might not be as articulate as what some of us might say, or I can ask, well, what is happiness to a child? And they may pick a toy or something like that, but there's still substance there. And I like that. But anyways, thank you too for surviving the Thoughtful Three. Hopefully you guys like those. Now, I want to go to the closing thoughts section. This is what I always have to show up. Zach's going to see this tomorrow on the sports podcast we do. We always do this with our guests, and that is just closing thoughts. I just want to know, how did it feel to be on your first ever podcast? But also, what did you think of your experience overall? So Zach, I'll start with you first to close out the night. Just anything you want to say to the listeners to finish it up, and just what did you think of your overall experience?
It was great. I love talking. All three of us talk for a living. I love sharing wisdom, sharing thoughts, always getting people to understand that, I love your title of this podcast. And I was telling you this the other day. I approach every woodworking task I approach it with, I know nothing. So I had to come to terms with that I didn't know anything, and it was all about learning. So that's why I think this is excellent as far as the conversation we're having from the philosophical standpoint. I enjoy. I hope this helps people that really want to kind of maybe get into the woodworking aspect, maybe kind of take the pressure off a little bit and show and say, hey, you know what, it's not as hard as it looks, and it's really rewarding. And when you're creating stuff with your hands, it's great. But yeah,
I just wanted to see, like, do you have any advice for Zach as he's kind of progressing further, because he's at a completely different stage where I'm at on this, and just for listeners, and also you can do your closing thoughts in the process.
So yeah, I really appreciate you having this forum for us to discuss woodworking and some philosophy along the way. I think just wherever you are, enjoy the process. If you don't like it, don't do it. Like there's no sense in saying, I'm going to go out and become a woodworker. Like that's a ridiculous goal, but just, I'm going to go out and build this coffee table that I need for my house, or, I'm going to make this gift for my mom, or, whatever that looks like, starting off for you. I am a message away. Reach out to me on Instagram, on Facebook, at Farmhouse Workshop on Instagram. You can go to facebook.com/The Farmhouse Workshop, or email me at thefarmhouseworkshop@outlook.com. I'd be happy to help you with anything that you want to talk about, whether it's just designs that you like, how to do something, or how I price my work, and anything like that I can help you with. I'm happy to help any beginners or experienced woodworkers alike. And as Zach Man, what you've done the last few months is really awesome. I would offer one piece of advice if you're open to it.
Sure.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going, man. Just that's it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. As you do more in the woodworking space, you'll find projects that draw you in. You'll find designs that draw you in. Attack those with passion. Don't worry. Like I said earlier, don't worry as much about the tools. But hey, as I need a little tool here and there for the project, don't feel bad for buying something that's going to make your work a lot better. I think the tools that I've bought down the road, or in the past, and the tools that I plan on buying down the road are all tools that I think this will take my time and it'll cut it in half, or this will take my work and it'll bump it up another notch. So as you plan those future purchases, make sure that you have a purpose for them. I have like two tools in my shop that I never touch. And I always wonder, like, oh, I thought this was going to be a great tool to have, but I never use it. And a couple of tools in the past I've just given away to people and said, hey, I don't have a use for this anymore. Like, it's just taking up space. So, and then just the other thing I would say is just, keep putting that positivity out there. Join the maker community there on Instagram, because there's so many people sharing so many cool stuff. So much cool projects and whatnot. And I would encourage any newbie to get on Instagram and search for woodworkers. The guys who have the accounts that are up in the hundreds of thousands, they're all well and good, but you're going to get a lot more engagement from smaller accounts like myself, or, people with maybe 200, 500,000 followers, because they have time to interact with each other, So, I've got friends out in, California and Seattle and, all over the place, lots down in Middle Tennessee. And we just like talking woodworking, there's always something else to learn. So anyway, Robbie, I really appreciate your time today. This has been a great conversation, man.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate it.
Admire your work, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, and I just want to say to both of you that I hope that you both are willing to come on another podcast in the future sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Different topic.
Absolutely.
I plan on doing a series in the fall over what does 21st century public education look like? Like, ideally, what should it look like? And I'm going to do a series of 3.
I would love
where
to
I'm
do
going
that
to
one.
try to get you guys. I have a couple of friends from Indiana that I'm really close to, some former students, some experienced teachers, some retired, some that are brand new. And my thing is that you guys know as well as I do that public education is getting, tons of criticism. It's always been criticized for not being good enough. And I think it's one of those times where we really do need to have some very difficult conversations over. And when I say 21st century teaching, I hope both of you know, since this is a philosophy podcast, I mean way more than technology. I don't mean just we need to have more technology, because sometimes schools are too obsessed with technology. It's not just about putting lipstick on a pig.
It's about good instruction.
Exactly.
Good instruction.
Making connections.
Yeah. And if it means that we offend each other, we really need to get to the heart of, well, what does good instruction actually mean, and how much should be student-led and teacher-led? And I know this is a whole nother thing that we're getting into. Zach, I'm also going to ask you about doing the philosophy of coaching sometime down the road too, and we'll get into that later on. But again, as I always tell my guests, keep your eyes and your mind open and be contagious. Have a wonderful night.